If you like the story, you can support the author on Patreon. Link is in the description.
Chapter 51, Chapter 49, Celebration. After leaving the court with a beaming smile, Tuna extended a warm invitation to his teammates. He wanted to celebrate their victory with a sumptuous A5 Weijio barbecue at his family's restaurant, just like they had done once before. The prospect of savoring the finest Weijio beef ignited excitement in everyone. They had already experienced the delights of this top-quality meat at the same restaurant. They were ushered into an unusually large VIP section upon arriving at the restaurant. Initially, the restaurant hadn't been prepared for such a large group from Takao, but the staff worked their magic by combining two VIP sections and arranging tables neatly in the middle. Normally, this kind of arrangement was strictly against the rules, but Tsuna's status allowed for this exception. The restaurant was determined to uphold the reputation of the Kazama family, after all. As they entered the VIP room, the atmosphere blended luxury and comfort. Soft, ambient lighting bathed the room in a warm glow, and the long, polished wooden table was elegantly set with fine china and crystal glassware. Plush leather chairs surrounded the table, inviting the team to settle in and savor their well-deserved feast. The air was filled with a tantalizing aroma hinting at the culinary delights. The team took their seats, their excitement palpable, and exchanged smiles and congratulatory words. This was a celebration they had long anticipated. As they raised their glasses for a toast, the food arrived. It was a meticulously crafted appetizer, a delicate beef tartar served on a bed of fresh greens. The A5 Weijio marbled to perfection and glistened under the soft lighting. Each bite was a revelation. The beef practically melted on their tongues, a symphony of rich, buttery flavors that danced across their palates. The freshness of the greens provided a crisp contrast, while a drizzle of truffle-infused vinaigrette elevated the dish to new heights. The team savored every bite. Their taste buds awakened to the wonders of A5 Weijio. Soon, another plate arrived. Thick slices of A5 Weijio steak adorned each plate, expertly seared to a perfect medium rare. The marbling was a work of art, and the meat was so tender it practically surrendered to the mere touch of a knife. As they cut into the steak, the juices flowed like liquid gold, and the aroma of sizzling beef filled the air. The first bite was a revelation, a crescendo of flavors that ranged from savory to slightly sweet. It was a taste that lingered, a memory that would be cherished for years to come. In a restaurant known for its elegance, the typical dining experience involves multiple courses, including appetizers, main courses, side dishes, and desserts. However, Tuna made a special request to keep things more relaxed this time. They were here to enjoy a barbecue party in celebration of their victory, after all. Despite his request, the staff insisted on finishing up with the dessert later. Amidst mouthfuls of delicious barbecue, the teammates chatted animatedly about their victorious game. They shared stories of their triumph and how it felt to hold the trophy, all while savoring the delectable food. To everyone's surprise, assistant coach Sanada and head coach Shirogain appeared. They had important news to deliver. Head coach Shirogain was retiring this year, with Sanada set to succeed him in the following year. After delivering the announcement, Sanada and Shirogain approached Tuna. They leaned in and whispered, "Kazama, do you think we could get some Jiyonde sake again?" Tuna couldn't help but chuckle softly at their request. It seemed that their true motive for coming here was the sake. He shook his head playfully, smiling at their enthusiasm. Both Sanada and Shirogain appeared to be sake enthusiasts, judging by the eager expressions in their eyes as they asked for the Jiyonde sake. This particular sake was exceptionally rare, typically reserved for only the most distinguished guests. Luckily for them, when Tuna inquired with the staff about the sake, it turned out that they had just received a fresh supply that morning. This meant that Sanada and Shirogain could indulge in a few bottles of the prized beverage. As the sake bottles were brought in, Sanada made a conscious effort to restrain himself, not wanting a repeat of the last time when he overindulged. However, watching Shirogain calmly savoring his drinks without any sign of intoxication reignited Sanada's competitive spirit. He started to drink more enthusiastically. Observing this, the members of the Takao team exchanged glances, with the senior members showing particular concern. Their expressions of concern deepened when Sanada, under the influence of the sake, began to regale them with embarrassing stories from his past. It was as if a floodgate had opened, and he couldn't stop himself from sharing these anecdotes. The first-year players listened in fascination, recalling the extra training sessions Sanada had put them through. Now they understood the reason behind those grueling practices. He was embarrassed and wanted to make up for his past blunders. Shirogain, adopting the wise elder's role, inadvertently worsened the situation. His encouragement prompted Sanada to share even more embarrassing stories, leaving the team members speechless, their lips twitching in disbelief. Exhausted and resigned, they exchanged looks, knowing that they would have to brace themselves for the extra training that awaited them tomorrow due to this sake-induced storytelling session. The staff interrupted their exhaustion with a sweet conclusion to the meal, a delicate matcha-infused cheesecake. It was a refreshing and sweet ending to their culinary journey, a perfect note to cap off their celebration. The entire meal had been a symphony of flavors, a culinary triumph that mirrored their victory on the basketball court. After some more conversation, they all left the restaurant. Tuna instructed the staff to arrange for Shirogane and Sanada, who were now quite drunk, to get home safely. The seniors announced that they were heading to the arcade for some fun, and Haizaki, being a regular arcade goer, tagged along. However, the other first-year players seemed uninterested in the idea. As they strolled towards the metro station together, Tuna paused mid-step, lost in thought. He couldn't shake the sense of hollowness he had felt when he held the championship trophy. He struggled to put his feelings into words, but the best explanation he could muster was that winning in Japan left him with an incomplete sense of achievement. However, putting more thought into it, he should have seen it coming as the scope of his ambition extended far beyond national borders. Lost in his contemplation, Tuna's moment of introspection was interrupted when Ayamine and the others halted their steps and turned to look at him. "What's up, man? Why'd you stop?" Ayamine inquired, his expression one of curiosity. Tuna broke the silence with an unexpected proposition. "Why don't you guys come with me to the States?" he suggested, prompting surprised reactions from the others. Chapter 52, Chapter 50, A Promise. Midorima, with his arms crossed, replied first. "That would be impossible for me," he stated firmly. His family significantly influenced Japan's political landscape. Midorima studying overseas was practically unfeasible as many factors tied him to Japan. "Why do you suddenly ask this, Tsunayashi?" Akashi, too, shook his head. His family's ties were deeply woven into Japan's fabric, and considering his father's conservative views on things, it would be nearly impossible to leave the country until he became an adult. Confusion danced across the faces of their teammates as they awaited Tsuna's response, curiosity bubbling within them. "Japan would be too small for us," Tuna resumed walking, bridging the gap to catch up with the others as he elaborated on his idea. Ayamine couldn't help but express disbelief. Shaking his head, he continued to stride alongside Tuna. Murasakibara, seemingly indifferent, moved in sync with the group. "Are you even serious?" Ayamine inquired. While Murasakibara might entertain the notion of moving to the States, his parents would likely disagree. They knew their son's carefree nature all too well, and the language barrier alone presented a significant obstacle in an English-speaking country. With his laid-back attitude and language challenges, the thought of leaving Murasakibara in the States would undoubtedly be a source of great concern for his parents. Tuna, however, wasn't disheartened by their initial refusal. He understood that they were all still quite young, after all. Nevertheless, there lingered a hint of regret in Tsuna's mind. He couldn't shake the feeling that their incredible talent might someday consume them, much like what had happened in the original storyline. "Don't worry, Tuna. Even if they don't want to come, I'll accompany you. Just wife me," Mamwa declared, giving Tsuna's shoulder an enthusiastic pat. Her words halted their little group, and Ayamine couldn't resist smacking Mamwa on the back of her head. "You? A good wife?" "That's a laugh," Ayamine chortled. He grinned, "I can imagine you accidentally poisoning your husband with breakfast one day." Mamwa flushed with indignation, ready to protest, but as the group erupted in laughter, she couldn't help herself as she laughed along with the rest while still trying to deny Ayamine's claim, saying she was still learning how to cook. Tuna chuckled at the banter, shaking his head in amusement. "All right then, I promise," he said with a confident grin. "I promise I'll come back one day and drag you all out of Japan to see the world, no matter what your excuses." Tuna's declaration was met with a collective smirk from his friends, each of them taking it as a challenge, and their competitive spirits reignited. The next day, it was clear that assistant coach Sanada was absent. He was probably still nursing his embarrassment from the previous night. After their tournament victory, the team quickly returned to their usual training routine. Despite their recent success, they understood the importance of continuous improvement. Following Tsuna's announcement that he would be leaving Japan, Ayamine became particularly persistent in challenging him to one-on-one matches. It became a daily occurrence, with Amine striving to close the gap between them. While Tuna remained undefeated against Amine, the pressure to maintain his dominance pushed him to work even harder. Their intense matchups attracted the attention of the entire Takao team. It wasn't just Amine, everyone wanted to spend time with Tuna before he left. With final exams approaching, it became even more crucial to make the most of their time together, knowing that Tsuna's departure was imminent. They hit the books together, just like any group of friends. Hanging out at Tsuna's place became common, occasionally, they even had sleepovers. While they didn't visit Tsuna's house daily, things changed when Tsuna showed Murasakibara his impressive collection of snacks from all over Japan. Murasakibara's eyes lit up like stars at the sight of these snacks. He couldn't resist asking if he could have some, and Tsuna, being the generous host, gave him the green light to enjoy as much as he wanted. Murasakibara's snack cravings became regular, and Amine suspected they were part of some secret training regimen. Amine decided to invite himself in to come over, often bringing Mamwa with him. Before they knew it, the other first-year members began showing up almost daily, turning Tsuna's house into their unofficial hangout spot. It had become their go-to gathering place. Having them around felt like a blessing to Tsuna. It evoked a sense of nostalgia, like the days of his childhood. It was a reminder of the simple joy of being a kid. He realized that those carefree days became rare once you became an adult. Adulthood brought responsibilities and the need to work hard to support and protect the people you cared about. These moments were precious to him. He had started hustling early in his previous life, and those memories had become hazy. He had little time for fun as he worked tirelessly to build a multi-million-dollar company before his untimely demise. In this life, Tsuna knew the pressure was even greater. He had a family legacy to uphold, and the expectation to excel in everything he did weighed heavily on his shoulders. The day of the final exam had arrived, and the school was abuzz with chatter. Some students were confident, others excited, and a few felt nervous. Amine, on the other hand, seemed to have already given up on the exam. He knew he couldn't make it, so he randomly selected answers that vaguely made sense to him. Murasakibara, in his usual carefree manner, didn't even seem to realize it was a final exam. He chose his answers based on the number of snacks he had with him that day. Mamwa, however, appeared unfazed. She hummed her favorite song as she calmly filled in her answer sheet. Kuroko and Midorima had no trouble with the exam, while Tuna and Akashi were confident they had aced every subject. As the results were announced, Tuna and Akashi found themselves at the top of the list, with perfect scores. In contrast, Amine and Murasakibara didn't fare well and received a scolding from their homeroom teacher. Fortunately, their recent tournament win softened the teacher's stance, allowing them to improve their scores. With that, Tsuna's time in Japan ended, and Takao organized a special farewell party in the gym in his honor. After everything was settled, Tsuna said his formal goodbyes to his friends. Chapter 53, Chapter 51, Time Skip. The rhythmic sound of basketballs echoed through the air, setting the stage for an intense showdown. The well-maintained hardwood court sparkled under the bright stadium lights, and sunlight streamed in, adding a natural glow. One side of the court was dominated by a formidable team dressed in black jerseys with vibrant green accents. They confidently controlled the ball, showing their prowess. On the opposite end, the opposing team, wearing pristine white jerseys, put up a strong defense. They did their best to prevent the black-clad players from scoring. However, the momentum shifted when one of the players in black jerseys had a gleam in their eye. With astonishing skill, they effortlessly broke through the defense and scored successfully. As the game concluded, it was clear that the team in black jerseys emerged victorious, as the excited commentator announced. And there you have it, folks. The winners of the Black Bulls Invitation Tournament are the Jabberwock. The crowd cheered, and the Jabberwock players' faces lit up excitedly. They couldn't have imagined reaching this point in their lives, becoming well known in the streetball scene in the United States, and clinching the championship in such a prestigious tournament. The credit for their victory was owed to a tall, handsome young man of Asian descent, standing at roughly 188 centimeters in height with black eyes. He nodded with satisfaction as the team members turned their attention to him. Their team manager, an equally tall and attractive Latina with an hourglass figure, approached the Asian man. She handed him a report. "Boss, here's the report for today's tournament," she said. "It appears that today's tournament was a tremendous success. It extended its reach to regions as far as Europe and Asia, significantly boosting the popularity of streetball on the global scene. 3 years had passed since Tsuna's return to the United States. During this time, he had successfully persuaded his father to grant him control over one of the companies within the Kazama Group. This company was known as Black Bull, a major player in producing an energy drink for athletes, which had gained immense popularity worldwide. Tsuna had given the company considerable autonomy to assist him in his mission to dominate the streetball scene, much as they had in other sports worldwide. Initially, the company's response to Tsuna's plan to conquer the streetball scene had been lukewarm. However, Tsuna managed to turn the tide by collaborating with numerous companies to expand awareness of the sport and its competitive tournaments. He emphasized the substantial prize money at stake, which was unprecedented then. Tsuna had also made substantial investments during this time, including a multimillion-dollar contribution to Instaculo amid its Series A investment round. This investment transformed his group into the company's primary shareholder. In addition, he harnessed the power of the company's social media platform to promote the sport, resulting in a significant increase in the platform's user base. His family called him to discuss these bold investments in the first year. His father, in particular, wanted to understand the rationale behind Tsuna's actions, as these investments had consumed millions of dollars. Tsuna had anticipated this conversation, so he presented the data from their rapidly expanding social media platform. He explained that with their aggressive marketing approach, the platform had the potential to become a billion-dollar company. Moreover, it could be a valuable asset for their conglomerate, serving various aspects of daily life. Hirotora, Tsuna's father, couldn't fully grasp the significance of this strategy but decided to view it as a valuable learning experience for his son. Even if it failed, it would teach Tsuna valuable company management lessons. So, he supported Tsuna's vision and allowed him to proceed as he saw fit. As time went on, their financial reports showed signs of progress. While they were still investing heavily to establish their presence across society, they began to turn a profit through brand deals that sought to promote their products at the tournament and on their social media platform. In the second year, they dialed back their aggressive marketing but achieved a significant milestone. Black Bull successfully dominated the streetball scene in the US, gaining recognition among the general population. Their social media platform, Instaculo, also experienced a breakthrough, with user numbers skyrocketing since they became the company's major shareholder 3 years ago. This year marked the creation of the largest streetball stage in the world. They had extended invitations to renowned teams from around the globe to gather in the US and face off against each other. Among the invitees was Jabberwock, a team that had gained fame in the US. "Boss, we've won!" Silver exclaimed, bubbling with excitement as he shared the obvious news. During Tsuna's tenure as Jabberwock's investor, he brought a proper coach to enhance their competitive abilities. He also maintained a close relationship with the team. Whenever they had spare time, Tsuna would join them on the court, actively participating in practice sessions and sparring games. Tsuna strongly desired to join his team in an official game, but the rules prevented him from doing so. His personal investment in Jabberwock and his role as a director overseeing Black Bull, the tournament's organizer, made it a conflict of interest. While Jabberwock was his team, the company belonged to the Kazama Group. Despite being unable to play officially, Tsuna's exceptional skills on the court garnered immense respect. As they played together, their eyes were filled with nothing but admiration and excitement, all directed towards Tsuna. Tsuna had not only elevated their basketball skills to their peak but also earned them admiration for his unwavering dedication to training, even amidst his busy company management schedule. Upon returning to the US, he took an accelerated program and an early exam, allowing him to complete middle school immediately. Money had its way of bending the rules. In the midst of congratulating them for their tournament victory, Tsuna dropped a bombshell: "Starting today, I won't be able to come around as I have to go far away. That's why." Jabberwock's reaction was palpable. This news took them aback. If they had their way, they wouldn't want Tsuna to leave. To them, he was more than just an investor, he was a cherished friend. However, Tsuna remained composed as he signaled to one of the men standing beside the Latina to step forward. "Our coach here, Demetrius Mythil, will be the team's coach and manager. Of course, I will have my team assist him to ensure he can settle into the new role smoothly." Saying these, Tsuna instructed his secretary to provide them with all the necessary details. As he bid them a proper farewell, he left, heading back to his family's mansion. As he settled comfortably in the passenger seat of his car, Tsuna gazed out of the window with a faint smile. "Let's go, Sabas." "Of course, young master," Sabas replied, and they drove away. Chapter 54, Chapter 52, Going Back to Japan. When Tsuna reached his family's mansion, his mother greeted him as always, but she couldn't help nagging him about being too hard on himself, just as all mothers do. She wanted her son, especially at Tsuna's age, to focus on his studies and have fun. Tsuna had already demonstrated his academic prowess by completing middle school early, but his mother was adamant that he shouldn't rush through high school. With patience, Tsuna responded to his mother's nagging with a wry smile, explaining his plans to return to Japan. Despite the persistent nagging, they entered his father's office. "Dear, you really should persuade him to stay in the States," Tsuna's mother implored his father as she settled onto the sofa. Hirutora, Tsuna's father, looked puzzled in Tsuna's direction, silently asking what was happening. "Hello, father," Tsuna greeted Hirutora politely as he sat across from his mother. Then, he explained, "I want to complete high school in Japan." Hirutora's face showed a mixture of understanding and curiosity as he asked, "So, that's why you've been gradually delegating your responsibilities to your team since last year?" Hirutora arched an eyebrow, showing he was open to the idea as long as Tsuna had thought it through. Tsuna nodded in response to his father's unspoken question. His mother, however, interjected with a dissatisfied tone, "Do you remember what happened the last time you studied in Japan?" She vehemently opposed Tsuna's plan to return to Japan for high school, especially after the previous incident where Tsuna had been forced into a dangerous situation, risking his life in a dogfight. Tsuna let out a weary sigh and explained his feelings, "I just need a break. I've been working non-stop for the past 3 years, and it's been exhausting." His mother fell silent, her earlier disapproval now wavering. Hirutora also sighed, recognizing the weight of Tsuna's dedication. His son had been toiling tirelessly while most kids his age were enjoying their youth. However, Hirutora knew his son's unwavering determination well, and a small smile tugged at his lips. But Tsuna wasn't finished. He locked eyes with his mother, a determined look in his gaze, and continued, "And I made a promise." Tsuna's mother tilted her head in confusion, asking, "Promise? With whom?" A spark of excitement gleamed in Tsuna's eyes as he responded, "With my friends, Mom. I promised them we'd come back to Japan together." He tried to convey his enthusiasm through his words, offering the warmest smile he could muster to convince his mother. Her heart melted as she gazed at her son's determined face and radiant smile. With a resigned sigh, she muttered something under her breath and rose from her seat, preparing to exit the room. "Thanks, Mom. I love you," Tsuna expressed with the same bright smile. Pausing in her tracks, his mother turned back to Tsuna. "But, you'll need to stay with your grandparents so they can take care of you while you're there, okay?" Tsuna nodded, the hint of a mischievous smirk playing at the corner of his lips, though his smile remained intact. He replied, "I understand, Mom." "Good. I'm glad you do, and I love you too," she affirmed before closing the door, leaving father and son alone for their discussion. Hirutora shook his head, observing Tsuna's blissful smile. "All right, enough with the act." Tsuna's cheerful expression returned to its usual self, and he shook his head playfully. "You're no fun, Dad." Hirutora sighed softly as he continued, "I can see right through your act. Don't assume your mother won't." Tsuna signaled to Sabas to bring his coffee over to the table while listening patiently. He knew his father was perceptive, and it wasn't the right moment to provide answers just yet. Judging by how you reacted to your mom's suggestion of living with your grandparents," Hirutora leaned back in his chair. He rested his chin on his hand, a calculating grin on his face as he said, "I suppose you were anticipating that, weren't you?" Tsuna offered a gentle smile as Sabas handed him his coffee. "So, that's why you arranged for Sabas' successor to go to that city last year." Hirutora's eyes widened with understanding as he recollected the Asian teenager Tsuna had brought to the United States 2 years ago. Hirutora fixed Tsuna with a serious look while Tsuna casually sipped his coffee. "You're quite a scary young man, aren't you?" Hirutora turned to Sabas for his opinion. "Wouldn't you agree, Sabas?" Sabas replied with the utmost respect, "The young master possesses an exceptional intellect. He's a true asset to the family." Hirutora couldn't help but chuckle. "I suppose you're right. He's my son, after all. My one scary son." Hirutora turned back to Tsuna, his expression now curious. "So, what's the actual reason behind your desire to return to Japan this time?" "Dad, I've already told you. I made a promise to my friends, remember?" Tsuna raised an eyebrow, wearing a playful smile. Hirutora couldn't help but shake his head in amusement. You're something else, he sighed. I've heard about your friends, and I'm glad you've found companions in Japan. But I also know there's more to it, right? Tsuna chuckled. You know me too well, Dad, he said, placing his coffee back on the table. Hearing Tsuna's remark, Hirutora couldn't help but raise his chin proudly. Sabas, on the other hand, maintained his professional expression, though if you looked closely, there was a slight twitch on his lips as if he felt a bit speechless. Of course, he would know you well, young master. You're the exact copy of your father. Sabas thought silently, restraining himself from rolling his eyes. Dad, you know I love basketball, right? Tsuna inquired, and his father responded with a nod. Tsuna continued, I'm a Kazama. When we do something, we give it our all to be the best. Hirutora's eyes flashed at this. That's why, to be the best, Tsuna announced, standing up and spreading his arms wide. With conviction in his voice, he declared, I have to be the best in the best team on the best stage in the world. And to have the best team, I need the best teammates with the best potential, right? Hirutora nodded in agreement. It was a trait deeply ingrained in those who carried the Kazama surname. So, that's why I'll come back to Japan. I want to scout some talents, Tsuna explained, his tone resolute. I've met some extraordinary players with world-class potential. He cleared his throat and settled back into his seat. And it feels like such a waste to let such talent stay in Japan, Tsuna concluded, his gaze fixed on Hirutora's deep, dark eyes, brimming with conviction and determination. Hirutora sighed, his thoughts racing as Tsuna's words stirred memories of his own youth. He began tapping his fingers on his desk, a rhythmic contemplation. Patiently, Tsuna waited, sipping his coffee with a composed demeanor. The tapping ceased, and Tsuna looked up, meeting his father's gaze. Hirutora placed both hands on his desk, resting his head on his arms as he closed his eyes. All right, he began, I'll allow you to go, but remember, you must be the best. Opening his eyes, his tone shifted. And also, once you turn 24, you must return to the group and fulfill your duties as a Kazama. Tsuna grinned, rising from the sofa to express his gratitude to his father before exiting the room. Chapter 55, Chapter 53, title at the end. What? Alexandra exclaimed, her eyes widening as she turned to Tsuna, who was casually sipping from a water bottle. You're heading back to Japan again. They stood at one of the oldest street ball courts in LA, where Tsuna knew where to find Alexandra. Although Tsuna's visits were infrequent due to his busy schedule, he occasionally dropped by to catch up or even jump into a game to contend for court supremacy. Today was one such day, with Tsuna joining the action. They had relocated to a different spot to play, considering that most of Tsuna's teammates, including Ben, were now in college. The original court where Tsuna first joined them was limited to high school students. That's a bummer, Ben remarked, wiping sweat from his brow with a towel. So, you won't be able to make it here anymore, hey? Yeah, Tsuna nodded regretfully. I really enjoyed hooping with you guys. It's a shame. Haha, don't sweat it, Ben chuckled, shaking his head. Whatever you're up to, I hope it goes great. Just give us a call when you're back in the States. Ben bid farewell as he had other obligations to attend to. The remaining team members shared their disappointment about being unable to play together for a while. After their chat, they followed Ben, heading off. Her hand resting on her temple, Alexandra sighed, both my star pupils returned to Japan last week, and now you too. Tsuna chuckled and said, it's a promise I must keep with some friends. Their conversation continued until Tsuna received a call from his mother, indicating that it was time to head home. Alexandra chuckled at Tsuna's interaction with his mother, remarking, your mom sure looks out for you, hey. Tsuna agreed with a smile, yeah, she's a bit overprotective. Anyhow, I should get going too, Tsuna said, rising to his feet. Turning to Alexandra, he asked with a mischievous grin, you know what, Alex? What's with that smirk? Alexandra raised an eyebrow, curious. Tsuna's grin widened, and he asked, do you want to come to Japan? What? Dash. When Tsuna returned home, his family decided to host a farewell dinner. His brother, Jin, and their in-laws from the Dor family were present. They engaged in lively conversation, discussing Tsuna's future plans. There was a tinge of regret in their voices as they realized Tsuna's exceptional talents in the business world would be temporarily sidelined while he pursued his dreams in Japan. Tsuna was unquestionably a prodigy in their eyes. As the dinner party ended, everyone retired to their respective rooms. The next day, Tsuna boarded his family's private jet bound for Japan. This time, their destination was Shizuoka Prefecture, where his grandparents resided. Upon arriving at the airport, Tsuna's grandparents were eager to see him. They had been waiting there, ready to welcome him with open arms. The love Tsuna received was overwhelming. Throughout the journey to their home, his grandmother continuously offered him snacks from the prefecture, and his grandfather, with the curiosity of a typical grandpa, bombarded him with questions about his life and adventures while adding in his own stories. However, as they neared their destination, Tsuna noticed a change in his grandfather's expression. Concern laced his grandfather's voice as he inquired, "Little Tsuna, are you absolutely sure about your school plans?" Tsuna maintained a calm smile, and his gaze conveyed reassurance as he replied, "Yes, Grandpa, you don't need to worry. I've already made all the necessary arrangements." "I understand. It seems like nothing can change your mind," Tsuna's grandfather sighed, resigned to Tsuna's determination. "You take after your father in that regard." Upon their arrival at the house, they were warmly greeted by the attendants who guided Tsuna to his new living quarters and provided him with a tour of the city, helping him become familiar with his new surroundings. It was time for Tsuna to attend his new school the following day. He made his way there with Sabas by his side, driving through the city. As they neared the school, they couldn't help but notice the graffiti-covered walls nearby. It starkly contrasted with the well-maintained and elegant buildings of Takao, where Tsuna had studied before. But what immediately caught their attention were the students entering the school gate. There were no security guards in sight. These students had brightly dyed hair in various colors, wore chains around their necks, and some sported visible tattoos. As Tsuna and Sabas approached the school gate, they inadvertently drew the attention of these students. A group of them began to gather, some brandishing blunt objects, and they soon surrounded Tsuna's car. "Hey there, buddy. You look like you've got some cash. How about sharing some pocket money?" the leader of the group asked, casually tapping his blunt object on the car's window. Sabas looked stern as he inquired, "Should I handle these troublemakers, young master?" He had maintained a stoic silence throughout the journey, clearly perturbed by the presence of these unruly delinquents inhabiting the school Tsuna had chosen. Tsuna glanced at Sabas and shook his head, gazing out the car window at the gathering delinquents. "No, Sabas. If you intervene, you might get into trouble. Remember, they're minors," he cautioned, his brow furrowing as he began to count the number of individuals in the unruly crowd. "I'll deal with these troublemakers myself." Sabas wore a slightly displeased expression but eventually agreed with a nod. Tsuna took note of the number of individuals surrounding the car. 23 people, hey? That's almost double the last time, he remarked, somewhat impressed, while unlocking the car door. "Should I try it out with this?" He muttered something under his breath and closed his eyes as the leader of the delinquents approached. "Hey, why are you closing your eyes?" The delinquent, assuming Tsuna was afraid, chuckled. "No need to be scared. Just give us your money." To the delinquent's shock, when Tsuna opened his eyes, they were a chilling, blood-red color that seemed to pierce right through him. It sent a shiver down his spine, freezing him in place. Before he could react, a sudden surge of pain coursed through his body, making breathing hard. He felt a powerful kick to his chest that sent him sprawling to the ground, unconscious. His comrades hesitated momentarily, their bravado shattered, before cautiously approaching Tsuna. On the sidelines, Sabas had quietly drawn a military knife, ready to intervene if needed. To Sabas' astonishment, it didn't take long before all 23 delinquents were lying on the ground, groaning in pain. Tsuna stood amidst them, his once white high school shirt stained with blood, looking unfazed. Just when it seemed like the ordeal was over, a group of people emerged from the school gate, moving in perfect unison. They were led by a young man with short, black hair that fell over his forehead, and his light grey eyes scanned the scene with an air of calm authority. The group behind the young leader was visibly shocked by the sight before them, but their leader remained motionless, facing Tsuna. Tsuna shook his head in displeasure. Blood stained his clothes and smeared across his face, but none of it was his. Tsuna had soundly defeated twice the number of people who had once landed him in the hospital, and he seemed entirely unharmed. "I thought you had things under control here," he said slowly. Suddenly, a cloud blocking the sunlight shifted, and a beam of light fell upon a gate that read Fukuda Soo Academy. You have some explanation to do. Tsuna wiped the blood from his face and continued, Nijimura. Title, Fukuda Soo Academy. Chapter 56, Chapter 54, Familiar Face. 2 years back, Tsuna had made a trip to visit his grandparents in Shizuoka. As was their tradition during his visits, they took Tsuna on a city tour. This time, they had a special plan in store. They were headed to a restaurant owned by their family, where Tsuna would have the chance to meet some influential government figures. His grandpa, a man with considerable connections and power, wanted to introduce Tsuna to these important individuals. Upon arriving at the restaurant and stepping out of the car, Tsuna spotted an unexpected figure strolling across the crosswalk. The individual eventually made their way to a nearby park, sitting and gazing up at the sky. Observing this, Tsuna told his grandparents he intended to say hello to a middle school acquaintance. He approached the person with a slight frown, noticing that the guy held a can of beer in hand. The person's flushed face indicated that he was clearly inebriated. What on earth are you up to, Nijimura? Tsuna inquired as he settled down beside Nijimura. He continued, you're not old enough to be drinking. Where did you even get that beer? Hearing someone scolding him, Nijimura was on the verge of getting upset when he noticed an unexpected face in front of him. Nijimura burst into laughter. Ha ha ha, I might have had a bit too much today if I'm seeing Tsunayashi here. Tsuna shook his head at Nijimura, who seemed to think he was hallucinating and smacked him on the head. The impact was enough to send Nijimura tumbling to the ground. Why does my head hurt? Nijimura mumbled in his drunken state, his words slurred. He staggered to his feet and found himself face to face with Tsuna, who maintained the same calm expression Nijimura recalled. Nijimura shook his head, dismissing the bizarre encounter. Forget it. This is probably just a weird dream. That guy was a nightmare, right? He, suddenly laughing like a lunatic, Nijimura lunged at Tsuna, seemingly intent on ending his nightmare. Sabas, who had been watching from the sidelines, grew alarmed and rushed toward Tsuna. But Tsuna signaled for him to hold back, and he evaded Nijimura's punches with surprising agility. As Sabas observed the scuffle, he couldn't help but be taken aback by Nijimura's efficient punches. It was clear that Nijimura had some natural talent in hand-to-hand combat, even though his form was rough and untrained. Sabas had to concede that Nijimura might have been a skilled martial artist in his own right, but unfortunately for him, he was up against a true monster. When Tsuna had just returned to the States, he got into a fight in the street ball court with a random nobody who had a Chihuahua beast instinct after he disrespected him too much. His mother almost grounded him the entire year and prevented him from going out to implement his plan, always worried he'd be in a dangerous situation. But Tsuna had found a way around it. He proved his ability to defend himself by enlisting the help of Sabas, a former underworld heavyweight with a background in special forces. Tsuna had mastered these techniques in just a few months, leaving Sabas dumbfounded. When Tsuna had exhausted Sabas' knowledge, he even emphasized the importance of diversifying his martial arts skills and taught Sabas different forms. Of course, Sabas was unaware that Tsuna's skills weren't confined to this life alone. He had trained in martial arts not only in this life but also in his previous one. Remembering those memories, Sabas shook his head and closely watched the situation, ready to step in if needed. Nijimura continued his barrage of punches and kicks, growing increasingly frustrated. He shouted, "Fight back, you imposter! How dare you pretend to be someone I know?" Still dodging the attacks, Tsuna shook his head in response, letting Nijimura vent his emotions. Nijimura's shouts grew more and more incomprehensible. "Young master, your grandparents might start to worry if you don't return soon," Sabas reminded Tsuna, his voice audible over the commotion. "I understand. Let me wrap this up, Sabas," Tsuna said with a sigh as he carefully observed another kick coming his way. Swiftly sidestepping, he closed the gap between them and unleashed a powerful punch, landing squarely on Nijimura's face. The force sent Nijimura crashing to the ground, where he groaned in pain. Feeling somewhat regretful about the situation, Tsuna began to walk away from Nijimura. Unfortunately, their meeting had taken such a turn, especially when Tsuna had an important appointment with some influential figures, and Nijimura clearly wasn't in the right state of mind. However, Tsuna's steps came to an abrupt halt as Nijimura suddenly broke into uncontrollable tears, screaming and wailing. Turning back to look at Nijimura's distraught state, Tsuna sighed. Nijimura appeared utterly broken and heartbroken, a pitiful sight to behold. Tsuna shook his head with a heavy heart as he sat beside the weeping Nijimura. He turned to Sabas, standing nearby, and said, "Sabas, come up with some excuse for me." "Understood," Sabas replied quietly, understanding the situation. He nodded to Tsuna and then informed Tsuna's grandparents of the delay. Tsuna remained seated, gazing up at the beautiful Shizuoka Prefecture night sky. He let Nijimura release his pent-up emotions, allowing him to cry and scream his heart out. Nearly an hour passed before Nijimura's sobs began to subside, and he sat up, his face stained with tears. Nijimura continued to cry as he shared his story with Tsuna. His father had been diagnosed with lung cancer, but they caught it early enough for treatment to be effective. The problem was that they didn't have much money, and the treatment costs were exorbitant. Despite his father's insistence that it was okay, he continued to work tirelessly to secure Nijimura's future. Takao, the elite school he attended, had steep tuition fees, even with an athlete scholarship Nijimura had obtained. To help out, Nijimura took any job he could find, mostly those that didn't require identification as he was still underage. Things took a tragic turn when his father broke his legs in a truck accident. Their financial situation worsened. They struggled to make ends meet in Tokyo, their insurance barely covering medical bills. Nijimura had to work more to support them, jeopardizing his club training and risking the loss of his scholarship. In these dire circumstances, with no clear solutions in sight, Nijimura's father made a heart-wrenching decision. He urged Nijimura to return to their hometown, Shizuoka, knowing it was the best chance for his son's future. Nijimura accepted this choice without hesitation, prioritizing his father's health above all else. They left everything behind in Tokyo and relocated to Shizuoka. Just last week, Nijimura accidentally overheard the doctor revealing the grim truth: if his father's cancer wasn't treated urgently, he might not have more than a couple of years, possibly just one, left to live. Devastated by this revelation, Nijimura stormed into the room, demanding to know why he hadn't shared this dire prognosis earlier. Overwhelmed by emotions, he left home impulsively and hasn't returned since. Listening to Nijimura's heartbreaking story, Tsuna couldn't help but feel a heavy sense of empathy. He sighed, sharing in Nijimura's pain. Nijimura fell silent, no longer shedding tears, but the weight of his troubles still hung over him. He stared at the night sky, lost in thought. Tsuna decided it was time to act. He rose from where he was sitting and turned to Nijimura. "Stand up." Nijimura, puzzled, asked, "Why?" Tsuna checked his wristwatch before replying, "Just trust me, okay?" Still somewhat dazed and wondering if he was merely hallucinating due to the alcohol, Nijimura obeyed and got to his feet. "Your story was tough. I honestly can't imagine what you went through." Tsuna, after hearing Nijimura's story, offered his sympathy. He approached Nijimura swiftly and without warning. In an instant, Tsuna's punch connected, and Nijimura crashed to the ground, knocked unconscious. Tsuna scolded the downed Nijimura. "But you've been causing your dad so much worry, you idiot." Afterward, Tsuna shook his head and walked away from Nijimura, who lay unconscious. "Sabas, handle this and find his dad's contact." "His father must be frantic," Tsuna instructed. "Of course, young master," Sabas replied with a bow as Tsuna headed towards the restaurant, running late for his important meeting. Chapter 57, Chapter 55, I don't know him. That day, Tsuna made a decision to assist them. While Japan had advanced medical technology, the United States was even more advanced then. Tsuna proposed to accompany Nijimura's father to the States for treatment. Nijimura's dad was initially unsure about this proposition. Tsuna instructed Sabas to persuade him, and after some discussions, Nijimura's father reluctantly consented to travel to the US with them. However, Nijimura's father knew medical treatment in the US was even more costly. To express his gratitude, he offered to work for Tsuna's organization as a way to repay the kindness. Tsuna remained silent for a moment, processing this offer. He couldn't help but shake his head with a grin. Nijimura's dad had essentially hired himself into the group, displaying some impressive audacity. However, Tsuna couldn't help but appreciate this clever move. So, Tsuna arranged a job for the man in Japan, leveraging some of their business connections there. Nijimura, witnessing this gesture, was deeply moved. He pledged his unwavering loyalty to Tsuna in a rather dramatic fashion. Tsuna chuckled as he watched Nijimura kneel and place his hand over his heart, swearing his loyalty in a manner reminiscent of knights from medieval times. It turned out that Nijimura had a deep fascination with stories of proud knights from medieval times. Initially, Tsuna was inclined to decline Nijimura's offer. On the other hand, Sabas had a different idea. He recognized Nijimura's talent in martial arts and proposed that Nijimura become his apprentice. Sabas was growing older and wanted to handpick and personally train Tsuna's next butler. Feeling a bit worn out by the situation, Tuna rubbed his temple. He wasn't overly concerned about who would replace Sabas as long as the next butler competently fulfilled their duties. However, seeing Sabas's earnestness, Tuna relented. He agreed to let Sabas train Nijimura as his successor. So, Nijimura joined them on their journey to the United States. It wasn't easy for him at first, as he had limited knowledge of English. Nevertheless, he adapted quickly, continuing his studies while honing his skills under Sabas's guidance. As Tsuna's personal butler, Nijimura's primary responsibilities included organizing and communicating Tsuna's daily schedule and serving as a bodyguard when required. Sabas believed that Nijimura possessed the essential qualities for this role. He had the potential to be a skilled fighter and displayed unwavering loyalty. With the right guidance and training, Sabas believed Nijimura could excel in this unique position. Back in the present, Nijimura understood the potential trouble if he wasn't present when Tsuna arrived at their school. This school had a notorious reputation for its delinquent population, and Nijimura had once been a highly sought-after fighter before aligning himself with Tsuna. Many of the school's delinquents were eagerly waiting for Nijimura to enroll in their school, hoping to recruit him. This was largely due to Nijimura's involvement in some shady jobs during his hustle as he was still underage, which sometimes led to confrontations in the neighborhood. However, Nijimura had little patience for such nonsense, especially as a middle school student. He hadn't given it much thought back then, as he was more focused on finding ways to earn money and even considered dropping out of school altogether. Nijimura couldn't help but feel slightly speechless while glancing at the delinquents scattered on the ground, seemingly in agony, with Tsuna standing amidst them as if it were nothing out of the ordinary. "Looks like we're a little late," Nijimura muttered to himself before approaching Tsuna and respectfully bowing. "Welcome back to Japan, young master. Why am I dealing with these thugs again?" Tsuna asked calmly as he accepted the towel Sabas handed him. The group behind Nijimura was utterly stunned by the scene unfolding before them. They nervously swallowed, watching as the individual in the center casually wiped the blood from his body using a white towel provided by a freaking butler. What left them even more flabbergasted was seeing Nijimura, known as the Demon King of their school, bowing to someone as if he were serving him. "I'm sorry. We were supposed to deal with the new students before your arrival," Nijimura apologized again, bowing slightly. Tsuna turned to Sabas and inquired about a spare uniform. Sabas acknowledged with a nod, then directed his attention back to Nijimura, a puzzled expression on his face. "What do you mean by that?" Nijimura gestured with his hand toward his group of men, who promptly approached the curious delinquents crowding around the gate. These individuals began attacking the new students suddenly, launching into an unexpected brawl. The delinquents fought back fiercely, but it became evident that Nijimura's crew was skilled and disciplined. Moreover, they were pretty self-conscious as well. If a single member was sufficient to handle an opponent, they engaged in one-on-one fights. However, when necessary, they didn't hesitate to join forces. "You fucking bitch! You think you're tough, hey?" One of Nijimura's group taunted as he delivered a series of kicks to a new student while cursing him. "You think you're a fucking dog with those chains around your fucking neck?" One of them shouted angrily as he confronted a new student. Another delinquent slapped one of the newcomers, while questioning with disdain, "What's this tattoo? You think you're some slave?" They delivered relentless punches. "But, senior, you have a tattoo too." One of the new students protested weakly, only to receive a swift kick to the stomach in response. Amidst the chaotic brawl, a more skilled fighter stood out. He had an athletic build and dark grey hair neatly styled in cornrows. 4 individuals managed to take him down, but he suddenly shouted, pointing in Tsuna's direction. "Wait, hold on. I know that guy. He knows me. Stop beating me." The 4 attackers paused, exchanging uncertain glances before reluctantly shifting their attention to Tsuna. Tsuna furrowed his brow, puzzled by the commotion. He couldn't recall ever meeting this man and was genuinely confused. "You lying piece of crap! Who do you think you are?" The 4 guys didn't let it slip because Tsuna looked puzzled and continued their attack. The guy on the ground screamed again, this time pointing at Nijimura. "Senior! It's me, Haizaki! Guys, he knows me, I swear!" Desperation was clear in the guy's voice as he tried to plead his case. One of the 4 attackers turned to Nijimura and asked, "Boss, do you know him?" However, Nijimura calmly examined the guy before him and then shook his head, uttering, "Nope, keep going." "Sure thing, boss." "Nijimura, you motherfucker." Haizaki's voice rang out, filled with anger and pain, as he desperately tried to evade the relentless blows from the four assailants. Tuna watched the brutal scene unfold, where these new students were being mercilessly beaten by their seniors in the name of discipline. He turned to Nijimura, speechless. "It seems like they have their own way of handling things here. I suppose I'll let it slide for now. Ha ha ha, come with me, young master. Let me show you around the school." Tuna shook his head and turned to Sabas. "He should be showing up soon too. Make sure he doesn't get into trouble." "Of course, young master," Sabas affirmed. Nijimura, curious, interrupted, "Are we expecting someone?" Tuna nodded, adding, "You'll meet him later. Don't dwell on it for now." With that settled, they carried on with their walk, completely disregarding the violent situation they were leaving behind. Chapter 58, Chapter 56, title at the end. Nijimura then began to give Tuna a tour of the entire school, updating him on his activities there. Fukuda Soo Academy strongly emphasized sports, boasting exceptional volleyball, baseball, and basketball teams. However, their standout was undoubtedly the martial arts club, renowned for its frequent victories and standing as a top contender for championship titles. This athletic focus sometimes overshadowed academic concerns at the school. Most students here were passionate about martial arts, and it was no secret that a significant portion of them had some affiliation with delinquent groups. Fukuda Soo Academy was essentially divided into four main power factions, each aligned with a different martial art discipline: Aikido, Judo, Jujutsu, and Kendo. However, the balance of power among these four groups was disrupted when Nijimura returned to Japan and enrolled in the school. At first, the four groups were in a frenzy, each vying to recruit Nijimura, who had quite a reputation as a promising fighter in the neighborhood. But rather than aligning himself with any of these established factions, Nijimura decided to establish his own group. This bold move didn't go unnoticed. It drew the attention of all the existing factions and sparked intense opposition from each of them. Unfortunately for them, Nijimura had undergone formal training under Sabas, transforming him into a formidable fighter. He was a force to be reckoned with in one-on-one combat, and high school-level opponents stood no chance against him. However, Nijimura understood that he couldn't take on all four of these factions alone, so he began recruiting individuals who showed promise and shared his vision of uniting the school and establishing a more peaceful atmosphere where students wouldn't constantly fear getting attacked. While Nijimura's actual goal was more about creating a conducive environment for Tuna to accomplish his plan once he returned to Japan, Nijimura encountered like-minded individuals who shared a similar vision. With his leadership, Nijimura slowly gathered his group and assimilated these rival factions individually. It took time and effort, but he managed to unite them under his banner, which he dubbed the Student Union. Tuna couldn't help but be impressed. Uniting the school's factions in such a way was no small accomplishment. He was glad he went along with Sabas's plan 2 years ago, realizing that Nijimura's martial arts skills were exceptional, as evidenced by his ability to bring the school together. As Nijimura explained, Tuna observed the school buildings. He noticed a clear contrast between the academic buildings, which appeared plain and unremarkable, and the sports facilities, which were well maintained and equipped with modern amenities. As they entered the gym where the basketball club was practicing, Tuna surveyed the court and nodded approvingly. The facilities were surprisingly good for a club that was rumored to be lacking compared to the school's martial arts club. Nijimura turned to Tuna and spoke, "Now that you're here in school, I've saved the captain's position for you." Tuna nodded in agreement, glancing at the club members who paused to look at them in their warm-up. There was curiosity in their expressions as they wondered who Nijimura had brought with him. Tuna couldn't help but be curious. He gestured to the basketball club members who were practicing on the court and asked, "Aren't they supposed to be in class right now?" Nijimura chuckled knowingly as if he had anticipated this question. "You got me, Tuna. I knew you'd ask." Tuna had previously asked Nijimura not to address him as a young master at school since it wasn't a formal setting, and Sabas was still actively serving him as a butler anyway. Nijimura provided some insight, saying, "You see, this academy puts a lot of emphasis on sports. They fully support students pursuing sports careers, even if it means missing their regular classes." "That makes sense," Tuna replied with a nod. He had already completed his high school subjects long ago, and this level of flexibility would allow him to focus on his training while exploring other areas of interest outside the standard curriculum. The tour concluded without any formal introductions to the club members. A welcoming ceremony for the new students who had chosen their respective clubs was scheduled. Tuna was guided to the auditorium where the ceremony would take place. As he entered, he couldn't help but notice that the new students were lined up with military precision. However, their uniforms were disheveled, and their faces bore the marks of a recent beating, a stark contrast to the orderliness of their formation. Tuna joined the line, and the person beside him couldn't help but ask why he appeared unscathed despite the apparent hazing from the new students. Some of them hadn't seen Tuna walking with Nijimura earlier. With a chuckle, Tuna explained that he had just arrived and had missed the initiation process. The others shook their heads in frustration, regretting that they hadn't considered doing the same. They also mentioned how fortunate Tuna was and hoped he wouldn't face a beating later. Once the ceremony wrapped up, Tuna made his way to the classroom. It was a typical Japanese school affair, with the homeroom teacher introducing themselves and the students introducing themselves to each other. Tuna couldn't help but notice that the homeroom teacher seemed quite skilled, which piqued his interest. It appeared that the teachers at this school were also martial artists, which explained how a school with a primarily delinquent student could still function smoothly. Among the students, Tuna also spotted Haizaki in his class. However, Haizaki avoided eye contact with him, almost as if pretending not to recognize him. Quite a shift from his desperate plea at the school gate earlier. After the class ended, Nijimura arranged for some of his associates to escort Tuna to the basketball club. When they arrived, Tuna found the club members assembled in perfect formation, with Nijimura standing before them, giving them some explanation that surprised them. As Tuna entered, Nijimura called him to the front and announced, "Today, I'm stepping down as the captain and passing the position to someone more capable, Tsunayoshi Kazama." Tuna nodded at the club members while maintaining his demeanor. The club members were taken aback. They had heard about Tsuna's legendary leadership at Takao, where he had led the team to victory in the tournament 3 years ago. It was Takao, the team that had dominated the tournament for 3 consecutive years with their generation of miracles. Nijimura had explained that if Tuna had stayed in Japan, he would have been the one to lead the generation of miracles instead of their currently well-known former captain, Akashi Sejuro. Before the club members could react to this surprising announcement, the door burst open, and a group of men entered, dragging in a person who appeared to be badly beaten. "Boss, we've brought the person you wanted," one of the guys reported to Nijimura. Tuna observed the situation amusedly while he looked at the person who had been beaten up again. "Why's he been roughed up once more? He was smoking behind the school and refused to follow us," the guy replied with a hint of disdain directed at the person. The individual appeared defiant as he yelled at Nijimura, "Nijimura, you fucker! How dare you lay a hand on me!" Nijimura frowned at this and signaled his men to give the person another beating. In the next moment, the guy was being roughed up again. "Please, I apologize. I'm Shogo Haizaki. I'm a new member of the basketball club. Nice to meet you all." The person now appeared considerably more honest as he turned towards the club members, offering a respectful bow as he introduced himself. The others gazed in astonishment at the guy whose face bore the marks of a recent thrashing. All eyes returned to Tuna, anticipating his speech, when the door swung open again. A newcomer entered the room. He had chestnut-colored hair that faded into a darker brown lower down. His eyes were brown, and he stood at an average height for an athlete. Tuna looked bemused this time, noting that the newcomer also appeared to have taken a beating, although it wasn't as severe as Haizaki's. The newcomer nodded to Tuna and then turned towards the others, offering a polite bow. "Apologies for my tardiness. I'm a new member of the club too." The person greeted everyone with cheer, introducing himself with a friendly smile. "I'm Shigehiro Agera. It's a pleasure to meet all of you." Title: Shigehiro Agera. Chapter 59, Chapter 57, Taking a Gamble. As Tuna watched Agera join the group, Nijimura leaned in and asked, "Is he the one you mentioned earlier?" "Yeah," Tuna replied, shaking his head slightly. He gestured for Haizaki and Agera to line up with the rest of the team. Nijimura stepped back, nodding in approval. "Well, if you scouted him personally, he must be good." Tuna couldn't help but hope for the best as he observed Agera, who seemed to fit right in with the others, engaging in excited conversation with his new teammates. Seeing Agera's cheerful demeanor, Tuna couldn't help but shake his head in amusement, reminiscing about their first encounter. A year ago, Tuna had been on a business trip to Japan. The purpose was to scout famous basketball teams worldwide as part of their plan to organize the world's largest streetball event. Technically, he didn't have to be there in person, but he figured it was also a good opportunity to visit his grandparents. As he scouted various teams across the country, Tuna got wind that the National Middle School basketball finals were coincidentally taking place at the Yoyogi Gymnasium in Tokyo, right around the time of his visit. Tuna decided to catch the final match when he learned it featured his former teammates. Originally, he intended to visit them and say hello, but watching the game changed his plans. The matchup was Takao High vs Mako High. Just by observing the game, Tuna could tell that Takao was about to trounce Mako. They completely controlled the game, deftly passing the ball and easily racking up points. Tuna furrowed his brow as he observed the game. It was clear that Takao wasn't putting in their full effort. Even though Mako was a decent team, they were completely outmatched. Tuna couldn't help but notice that something seemed off about Murasakibara. Although he moved on the court, his mind appeared distant. Akin, too, had lost the spirited expression Tuna remembered. Instead, he wore a bored and disinterested look. However, Tuna noticed a new face in Takao's lineup amidst this. This blonde guy, whom Tuna didn't recognize from his time at Takao, seemed to be in a heated discussion with Akin. He was gesturing energetically, insisting on receiving the ball, while Akin appeared weary. Tuna recognized him as Kai's Ryota. He couldn't help but admire the guy's potential. Kai's was clearly talented, and Tuna believed he had plenty of room for growth. Midorima, on the other hand, maintained his usual stoic demeanor but played with a passive style that was quite different from what Tuna remembered. Meanwhile, Akashi seemed like a completely transformed person. In the game, Akashi took on the center role, displaying exceptional ball handling skills that facilitated easy scoring for the team. Akin, however, grew increasingly bored with the lopsided match. What annoyed Akin even more was the fact that their opponents seemed to have lost their fighting spirit. Their faces wore expressions of resignation, which further dampened his mood. As Tuna watched the game, he couldn't help but notice the absence of Kuroko. He realized that, up to the point he left, everything had unfolded just as it had in the original storyline. Tuna couldn't help but feel a pang of regret as he watched the lackluster match unfold before him. He shook his head in disappointment. The game was anything but exciting. Takao played effortlessly, not breaking a sweat, while Mako struggled to keep up. By halftime, it was clear that Mako had all but given up, their players barely moving on the court. Amidst this despondency, Tuna noticed one exception, and it was Agera. Despite the bleak situation, Agera continued to persevere, putting in a commendable effort to make a difference on the court. Tuna couldn't help but focus on him, feeling a sense of admiration for his determination. Watching Agera's unwavering determination on the court brought back memories for Tuna. He saw a reflection of his former self in Agera, a player who refused to give up, even when the odds seemed insurmountable. However, a frown creased his face as Tuna reminisced about his own past experiences. He couldn't help but think of the original storyline and glanced at the scoreboard. In the game's final seconds, it seemed that Agera had finally realized the extent to which Takao was toying with them. He overheard snippets of conversation from the Takao players and turned his gaze to the scoreboard, a look of despair crossing his face. The score stood at a staggering 111-11, a clear testament to Takao's absolute dominance in the game. The crushing reality of the game's outcome had shattered Agera's mental fortitude, and he couldn't hold back the tears any longer. His eyes welled up as despair washed over him. Witnessing this scene left Tuna with a sense of disdain, and he muttered, "Pathetic." However, despite his words, after the game had concluded and the awards ceremony had passed, nearly emptying the gymnasium of spectators, Tuna found himself in the designated changing room for the defeated Mako team. From outside, he could hear someone letting out heart-wrenching screams of heartbreak, accompanied by the sounds of things being violently thrown about. Tuna had a pretty good idea of who it was and shook his head in response. Before long, the changing room door creaked open, and Agera timidly stepped out. He spotted Tuna standing there with a furrowed brow and attempted to force a smile, although it came across as rather ghastly. "Sorry you had to see that," he mumbled apologetically. "I'm sure it was pretty shocking." "Don't force that smile. It looks terrible," Tuna replied, his frown deepening. Agera let out an awkward, hollow laugh. "My bad," he said, lacking the energy for a more elaborate response. Eager to put some distance between himself and the situation, Agera turned and walked away. "Giving up after only that?" That was pathetic. Tsuna's words cut through the air like a knife. Agera abruptly stopped in his tracks, his face twisting into a mask of rage as he turned towards Tsuna. What do you know? He shouted, his voice laden with anger. You don't understand anything. Tsuna didn't back down, his expression unyielding. You can't hide behind your circumstances. It doesn't change the fact that you were pathetic out there. The tension between them hung heavy in the air as Agera seethed with frustration while Tsuna held his ground. Tsuna pressed on, his determination unyielding, until Agera's spirit was utterly depleted. The weight of Tsuna's words silenced him completely. Tsuna sighed and took a seat on the closest bench. Agera, still wearing a heartbroken expression, gazed at Tsuna and asked a question that seemed to haunt him, then how can I stop being pathetic? Tsuna turned to the defeated young man and uttered a simple yet profound response, just bite them. What do you mean? Agera asked, his confusion evident. Tsuna explained patiently, they may seem like giants compared to you, but even an ant can inflict a tiny bit of pain on a human. You have to find your way to bite them. Just bite them, Agera mumbled, lost in thought. The memory of those indifferent faces on the opposing team, toying with his own, made his fists clench, and his veins bulge with determination. Agera gathered his resolve to fight back and asked, so, how am I supposed to bite them? While Agera's earlier despair had stirred something in him, it wasn't the primary reason Tsuna had sought him out. The real motive for his visit was more of a gamble, and he couldn't help but smirk at Agera's question. What do you think of Shizuoka? Don't you think it's a beautiful city? What? Chapter 60, Chapter 58, New Training Drills. Remembering their previous encounter, Tsuna glanced at Agera, a sense of uncertainty flickering in his mind. I hope this gamble pays off, he thought. Tsuna was essentially betting on the plot armor effect. In the original story, anyone associated with Kuroko went through their own phases of growth and development. In Siren, nearly the entire team had moments of growth and eventually overcame formidable opponents like Akashi, who had 3 uncrowned kings supporting him. From a technical standpoint, Akashi's team held an advantage regarding their overall skills, including physical strength and basic abilities, compared to Siren. However, in the end, they were defeated by Siren. Tsuna recalled that Agera was Kuroko's childhood friend. Even though he didn't watch much stuff in his previous life, these stories always had a plot twist where the childhood friend would disappear, only to return later as a formidable opponent or a valuable ally. Observing Agera's progress since their last encounter, Tsuna nodded approvingly. It had been a few months, but Agera appeared in better shape. Tsuna had provided him with a workout plan, basketball drills, and a dietary regimen to enhance his foundational skills. The training regimen Tsuna had designed was undeniably demanding. It required unwavering dedication and a strong work ethic to follow through. Not everyone possessed the commitment to adhere to such a rigorous schedule. The workouts were strenuous, often leaving participants exhausted and mentally drained. Given these challenges, Tsuna couldn't help but feel deeply impressed by Agera's determination and discipline. It was abundantly clear that he was investing everything he had to elevate his skills and face off against the generation of miracles. After completing his introduction as the new captain and outlining his plan for changing their training routines and drills, Tsuna cast a heavy, imposing aura that caused a few members, including Haizaki, to flinch. He spoke with a firm resolve, stating, I know some of you might not like the idea of a first year like me being your captain. He paused momentarily, letting his words sink in before continuing, but understand this, I'm not here to make friends or be your mentor. A heavy silence settled over the room. The team members were well aware of their former captain, Nijimura, and his formidable reputation as the demon king of the school. Given this understanding, none felt courageous enough to challenge Tsuna, especially since Nijimura had willingly passed on the position and stood right behind him like a loyal supporter. Tsuna nodded, signaling that they would commence the new training regimen and drills immediately. He then instructed Nijimura to lead them. Their regular training, initially introduced by Nijimura, had already been quite rigorous compared to their previous routines. Some team members, particularly the senior ones, assumed it wouldn't be much tougher than usual. To their astonishment, some of them began to feel nauseous by the time they reached the third set. The situation was even more challenging for the first-year members, with most emptying their stomachs of whatever they had eaten earlier. The team was taken aback when they noticed that Agera hadn't thrown up, although he appeared to be struggling. Witnessing how he clenched his teeth and persevered without showing any signs of faltering earned him the respect of his teammates. Yet, what truly astonished them was the sight of two individuals who seemed unfazed by the grueling workout. Tuna and Nijimura, despite perspiring, maintained a controlled rhythm in their breathing and movements. This training, which had caused the first-year members to empty their stomachs, appeared to be a walk in the park for the duo. Once the grueling training session came to a close, every member of the team lay sprawled out on the floor, completely drained and gasping for air. With a bottle of water, Tuna nodded approvingly at his teammates and turned to Nijimura. "You did a great job getting them ready for this training." Nijimura scratched his head in a bashful manner, looking somewhat embarrassed. "I just followed your instructions." Tuna had advised Nijimura to prepare the team in advance last year, so they were already familiar with these intense drills when Tuna took over. As for the first-year players, Tuna had expected them to struggle. Tuna didn't fret over whether this intense training would deter them from continuing with the club. It was simple, they could leave any time if they couldn't handle it. Under his leadership, the club would be no place for the faint-hearted. He cast a glance at Haizaki, who was now retching outside. This guy had a habit of trying to bail out of these grueling drills midway, but a stern look from Nijimura always managed to keep him in line. Tuna shook his head, somewhat amused, and went over to Agera, who was also catching his breath on the floor. Nijimura followed close behind. Tuna offered a nod of approval. "You did well with the drill." Before giving Agera a chance to respond, Tuna inquired, "Why did you get roughed up as well?" He remembered instructing Sabas to handle the matter, so Agera showing up with signs of a beating puzzled him. Agera laughed awkwardly, his hand rubbing his neck as he explained, "I felt bad for the others, so I asked the seniors to give me the same treatment." Tuna was left momentarily speechless by Agera's response, and Nijimura, standing beside him, wore a similar bewildered expression. "Is this guy for real, young master? Are you sure you scouted him yourself?" Nijimura leaned in and whispered to Tuna. Tuna was taken aback by Agera's unexpected character. "I wasn't aware he'd be such a pushover." Setting that thought aside, Tuna shifted to another pressing concern. "But more importantly, do we have a coach here?" That? It's a complicated situation," Nijimura responded with a shake of his head. He proceeded to fill Tuna in on the details. The previous year, there had been a conflict with the coach. As expected for a school known for its delinquent students, the dispute had turned violent. While the coach had put up a decent fight, he was outnumbered and ended up with broken legs, landing him in the hospital. Nijimura had personally expelled the members involved in this incident. Despite reports that the coach's condition hadn't improved much, he didn't seem inclined to return. Nijimura recounted these events to the school authorities. Still, upon witnessing how capably he managed the club and the effectiveness of the rigorous training routines he had implemented, they chose to take a hands-off approach. They left the club entirely under Nijimura's jurisdiction. Tuna couldn't help but think that such an outcome was par for the course at a delinquent school. He shook his head at the situation. However, a spark flashed in Tsuna's eyes as he considered the vacant coaching position. "Should we make another attempt to visit our former coach and try to persuade him to return?" Nijimura suggested. "I have a better option in mind for that. I'll keep you posted once we've secured the coach," Tuna replied with a sly grin, thinking back to a blonde woman he had asked about coming to Japan. Chapter 61, Chapter 59, Practice Game. After giving the team a moment to catch their breath, Tuna gathered them on the court and announced they would have a practice game. This elicited groans from the players, who were already feeling sore. Inside the gym, there were multiple courts. Tuna divided the teams, with Nijimura taking charge of Haizaki, Agera, Kazuhiro Mochizuki and Hideki Ishida, the team's regular, while Tuna led the reserve players. Nijimura, holding the ball in his hand, raised an eyebrow. "Are you sure about this?" he asked. Nijimura deeply appreciated Tsuna's basketball skills, recognizing how exceptional he was compared to other players in Japan. However, he remained skeptical about whether Tuna alone could take on their team. He knew that the reserve players in their club were not on par with their starters. Even though Haizaki had a difficult personality, his basketball skills were undeniably solid. Reflecting on Agera's performance during the demanding drills earlier, Nijimura wasn't entirely sure about his abilities. Still, he reckoned that Agera's determination to endure the grueling training without getting sick must count for something. "When was the last time you saw me play?" Tuna asked as he signaled for his team to get into position. Nijimura thought momentarily and replied, "It was a year ago." Tuna wore a confident smirk. Exactly, he said. Nijimura shook his head, expressing doubt. He knew Tuna was incredibly skilled, but he questioned whether there was room for improvement when someone was already that good. Unfortunately for Nijimura, his assumption was about to be proven wrong in the upcoming game. As the game commenced, Nijimura's team effortlessly won the jump ball, taking control of the court and advancing cautiously. They were keenly aware of Tsuna's prowess and skill. Recognizing that their primary objective was to outmaneuver Tuna, they passed the ball precisely, skillfully avoiding him and scoring some points. Tuna remained quiet but signaled for the ball. Dribbling the ball at a deliberate pace, Tsuna's teammates followed his lead as they advanced down the court. However, noticing Tsuna's intent, Nijimura signaled for Haizaki to join him. They positioned themselves in front of Tuna, determined to impede his progress. I won't take this lightly, Nijimura muttered to himself, aware that defending Tuna one-on-one was almost impossible. Despite this, Tuna remained unfazed. He altered his dribbling rhythm and attempted to slip past Nijimura's side. But Nijimura's response was swift as he sidestepped to block Tsuna's path. Undeterred, Tuna swiftly switched to the opposite direction the second Nijimura took that step, eluding the defense. Nijimura couldn't help but frown. He'd known for a while that Tuna had lightning-fast reflexes. It wasn't limited to just basketball, even during their martial arts sparring sessions, Tuna had seemed to use Nijimura as a punching bag. However, Nijimura wasn't alone in this challenge. Haizaki quickly acted, attempting to snatch the ball from Tuna as he went for the crossover. Unfortunately, Tsuna's reactions were quicker. He smoothly twisted his body, slipping past Haizaki's defense. As Tuna breached their defense, the rest of Nijimura's team scrambled to stop him. In a typical game, Tuna would often pass the ball to his teammates in such moments, increasing their chances of scoring. But this was not just any game. Despite the team's reluctance to challenge him, he knew he had to earn their respect. As they scrambled to stop him, Tuna showcased his basketball prowess. With swift dribbles and agile moves, he deftly maneuvered around their defense one by one. Even Agera, who looked utterly shocked, couldn't impede his progress. Tuna finished his impressive display with a smooth layup, earning the team 2 points. Observing Tsuna's incredible display, Nijimura couldn't help but shake his head, feeling a mix of awe and resignation. Well, can't say I'm entirely surprised. He realized he had to re-evaluate his perspective on Tuna, the monstrous talent he'd become. It wasn't just Tuna, even thinking back to their former teammates from Takao, Nijimura understood that he might have underestimated their capabilities. As a team hailing from Shizuoka and being a senior, Nijimura hadn't witnessed the generation of Miracles games or played against them directly. Now, contemplating their legendary dominance in national competitions, he realized he needed to be more cautious in the future. Agera watched Tsuna's solo triumph with amazement and somber reflection. Memories of facing off against the generation of Miracles flooded back, casting a shadow over his expression. Thinking of giving up. Tsuna's hand landed on Agera's shoulder, jolting him from his reverie. Surprise flickered across Agera's face as he refocused. Aware that his thoughts had wandered, Agera vigorously shook his head, determination settling in his eyes. No turning back now. I'm committed now, no matter how tough it gets. Tuna acknowledged this with a nod, then returned to his position. With a newfound resolve, Agera watched Tsuna's retreating figure, muttering, "And I'd rather die trying." Nijimura's team steadily piled up points on the scoreboard as the game unfolded, thanks to their coordinated efforts. Conversely, Tuna made a one-man show, matching them point for point. Haizaki couldn't help but clench his teeth in frustration. Whenever he got hold of the ball, it felt like Tuna had a sixth sense for stealing it away, almost like he was a magnet for turnovers. He attempted to steal Tsuna's moves, but just as he could never replicate the finesse of the generation of Miracles, he could not mirror Tsuna's skill at all. Damn it! Is this guy really on their level? Haizaki's face twisted with irritation. A voice broke through his frustration, pulling Haizaki back to the court. He saw Tuna approaching, dribbling the ball. What? Haizaki questioned, not entirely focused on his defense. Tuna seemed to notice this and wore a disapproving expression. No wonder Akashi discarded you. You're just garbage. Haizaki's mind momentarily froze, processing the insult that had just been thrown at him. His face reddened with anger, and he lunged at Tuna, putting all his energy into stopping him. You, fucker. He spat out a curse. I didn't know your situation, but... Tsuna gracefully sidestepped, keeping the ball out of Haizaki's reach. Haizaki chased after it desperately, his fingers inches away from touching it. But in a swift move, Tsuna reclaimed the ball and retreated, leaving Haizaki startled. Haizaki, who was driven by his anger and frustrations, had put all the strength he could muster into the move. And, as the ball slipped out of his reach, he lost his footing and crashed to the ground with a resounding thud. Time seemed to stretch as Haizaki watched Tsuna glide past him. Tsuna's gaze was as chilling as ice, reminiscent of the coldness he had felt when Akashi had expelled him from the team. If you're thinking of quitting, do it now. With me here, this club isn't for the weak. Tsuna's voice was icy, leaving Haizaki behind as he continued his assault, effortlessly penetrating the opposition's defense and adding another point to his team's score. The game ended, and the scoreboard scored 33-28, with Tsuna's team as the clear winner. The team members, already familiar with Tsuna, turned their attention toward him, their expressions marked by shock. Unfazed by the result, Tsuna casually wiped the sweat from his brow with a towel. Before this game, they didn't say anything when Nijimura stepped down and gave his position to Tsuna. Doubts had lingered in their minds. However, as they witnessed Tsuna's incredible performance on the court, those doubts evaporated, replaced by a deep sense of awe and respect for their new leader. Chapter 62, Chapter 60, Reverse Psychology. While most of the team was impressed and filled with respect for Tsuna's remarkable skills, Haizaki seethed with frustration and stormed off the court in anger. His abrupt exit left the others in silence, watching him go. Nijimura, breaking the quiet tension, approached Tsuna, casually taking a sip from a water bottle. "You were acting a bit out of character back there. What's your game?" Nijimura questioned Tsuna, his curiosity piqued. Agera, who hadn't known Tsuna for very long, also listened intently. He couldn't quite reconcile this taunting, seemingly overconfident Tsuna with the person he had come to know in recent days. Tsuna gazed at the doorway through which Haizaki had just stormed out. He turned back to Nijimura and posed an unusual question. "Imagine you're a prideful tough guy with a massive ego. Would you actually do it if I instructed you to head south?" Puzzled by the question, Nijimura frowned and pondered momentarily, mumbling to himself as he contemplated. He eventually replied uncertainly, "If I were that kind of person, then probably not, right? That will hurt my ego to do so." Satisfied with Nijimura's answer, Tsuna nodded and continued, "Right. So, if you won't follow my orders, what will you do instead?" Nijimura, still deep in thought, placed a hand on his chin, attempting to envision himself as a prideful, tough guy. However, before he could answer, Agera jumped in, enthusiastically declaring, "I'll head west, Captain." "Correct, he'd do the opposite of what I said," Tsuna affirmed with a chuckle. It suddenly dawned on Nijimura, his eyes widening in surprise. He had heard about Tsuna's uncanny interpersonal skills from Saba's. However, they mostly focused on training during their time together, so Nijimura hadn't witnessed these skills firsthand. The way Tsuna effortlessly manipulated people and situations to his advantage was unsettling. Now that he had witnessed it firsthand, even in the level of interactions among club members, Nijimura couldn't help but acknowledge that Tsuna could wield this power on a larger societal scale. "You're one scary guy, young master," Nijimura remarked with a wry smile. Nijimura was immensely grateful to have Tsuna as an ally. The idea of going up against Tsuna as either an opponent or an adversary was too daunting even to consider. Understanding Nijimura's unspoken sentiments, Tsuna gave a slight shake of his head. Agera, on the other hand, seemed oblivious to these subtleties. He likely didn't pick up on these nuances. To him, Tsuna did something amazing that he didn't understand, but what mattered most was that Tsuna remained the same person he had encountered during their final match. Tsuna was no stranger to dealing with a diverse range of people, each with their own unique quirks and personalities. He had a remarkable ability to understand and adapt to these differences. This principle applied to Haizaki as well. Despite Haizaki's infuriating behavior, Tsuna had a clever strategy for dealing with him. He employed reverse psychology, using Haizaki's deep-seated frustration with Akashi to his advantage. By telling Haizaki he might as well quit right away, Tsuna aimed to bruise Haizaki's ego. He knew that Haizaki would refuse to follow his orders, which would blow his pride. Instead, Haizaki would likely do the opposite of what he was told, driven by the need to prove Tsuna wrong and to boost his own ego. "How's life treating you in Shizuoka?" Tsuna inquired, turning his attention towards Agera. Agera's face lit up with a warm smile as he replied, Life here is wonderful, not as bustling as Tokyo. People are friendlier, and there's a real sense of community. My grandparents have been great, as always, always looking out for me. Agera shared a commonality with Tsuna. Both of them lived with their grandparents in Shizuoka. Agera's parents, on the other hand, had chosen to stay in Tokyo for work. His decision to complete high school in Shizuoka had taken them by surprise initially. However, when they saw the determination in his eyes, they couldn't bear to deny their only son's request. Recalling how distressed Agera had been during the final game against Takao in the Nationals, they thought that the change of environment might be good for him. So, they agreed to his sudden request and informed their relatives in Shizuoka, who happened to be Agera's grandparents on his mother's side. Tsuna acknowledged Agera's response with a satisfied nod. Knowing that Agera was content with his life in Shizuoka gave him relief. After all, good mental health was crucial for personal growth, especially if Agera intended to truly bite the generation of miracles. Turning his attention to Nijimura, Tsuna instructed him to have the team complete a set of cooling down exercises before concluding the day's training session. Over the following week, several team members decided to drop out. It was clear that the intensity of the training had overwhelmed them, causing fear and discouragement. Tsuna, however, remained unfazed by this development. He had anticipated such outcomes from the start. Nijimura had a different perspective on the matter. He took it upon himself to visit each departing member and inquire why they chose to leave. Unfortunately, their minds were made up, and they had no intention of returning. Tsuna could only sigh in response to Nijimura's ultimately unsuccessful efforts. This rigorous training regimen was just the starting point. Once the team adapted to it, Tsuna had plans to introduce an even more challenging regimen. Such intense training wasn't meant for those lacking determination. Despite the departures, there was an unexpected silver lining. During training, Haizaki underwent a remarkable transformation. He embraced the drills wholeheartedly and pushed himself to compete with Agera, trying to outdo each other in completing them as quickly as possible. Tsuna originally only intended for Haizaki to catch up with their training, as he was needed in Tsuna's plan to show the generation of miracles that they were like frogs in a well, unaware of the broader world beyond. Observing Haizaki's eccentric behavior during this time, Tsuna couldn't help but shake his head in amusement. The guy, Haizaki, seemed to grasp that challenging Tsuna immediately would be a futile effort. He'd been observing the team members and categorizing them by skill. Haizaki already surpassed most, including some of the senior regulars. But that wasn't his goal. So, he decided to start from the bottom, with Agera, the least experienced. If he could outshine Agera, he'd move on to Nijimura, and, finally, to the ultimate challenge, Tsuna. Seeing this unexpected turn of events, Nijimura gave Tsuna a thumbs up. Meanwhile, Agera, who tended to be airhead, was delighted because he thought Haizaki was now his friend. He eagerly competed with Haizaki, who seemed slightly irritated by Agera's chatty demeanor. Chapter 63, Chapter 61, title at the end of the chapter. When Tsuna returned to his grandparents' house, the evening had settled in, and it was time for dinner. How was school? Are you having a good time? His grandmother inquired, continuing their daily tradition of checking in on him. It was like giving a daily report, but it also displayed their deep concern, which always touched Tsuna's heart. Tsuna's grandmother understood that he didn't need to attend school since he could already take the advanced test to earn his high school diploma anytime he wanted. However, she was particularly concerned about his social interactions and relationships with other kids at school. Her worries were amplified because Fukuda Soo Academy had a reputation for being a rough school, and she feared Tsuna might get into trouble. Over the past week, Tsuna had been sharing his experiences, carefully omitting that he had gotten into a fight on his very first day. He smiled warmly at her and recounted his activities for the day, showing genuine interest in her well-being. After all, they were both in their early 80s, and their bond was strong. Tsuna and his grandma continued their friendly conversation, while his grandpa listened with a small, contented smile on his face. Despite his grandpa's warm demeanor, Tsuna knew that beneath that grandfatherly facade lay a shrewd and powerful figure who had once wielded considerable political influence in Japan. Tsuna believed that his grandpa knew everything happening in the city, including the fight he had kept hidden from his grandma. However, his grandpa did not mention it, and Tsuna felt relieved. Grandpa seemed to understand grandma's tendencies well and didn't want to make her overly anxious. Tsuna, do you remember one of the government officials you met 2 years ago? Grandpa interjected, breaking the flow of Grandma's conversation with him. Grandma shot a disapproving look at her husband but chose to stay quiet. Tsuna reminisced about the faces he had encountered in a restaurant on the night when he looked after the inebriated Nijimura. Yes, I remember all of their faces, Tsuna replied. So, which one are you talking about, Grandpa? Grandpa's grandfatherly smile vanished, replaced by a more serious expression. The annoying one. It was evident that Grandpa had some negative feelings toward this individual. Tsuna knew exactly who he meant. That old man had persistently been trying to arrange a marriage between Tsuna and his granddaughter, who was likely still in middle school then. Grandpa didn't seem angry about the betrothal proposal itself, but rather, it was how this man slipped it into conversations occasionally that bothered him. As Grandpa's expression turned sour, it seemed like the man's persistence hadn't ended with their last encounter. He even sent you a welcoming gift last month, didn't he? Grandpa said, taking a sip of his tea while frowning. Tsuna nodded, a bit puzzled about why Grandpa had suddenly brought up this matter. Why are you telling me this now? Grandpa sighed and explained that the man's birthday was approaching, and he had another important meeting scheduled for that day, preventing him from attending the birthday celebration. It would have been easier if the event had been in Shizuoka, but unfortunately, it was taking place in Tokyo. So, I'd like you to go in my place, Grandpa said. He knew sending a representative was typically considered impolite, but he trusted that Tsuna would be well received. In fact, that man would probably be thrilled to meet Tsuna again. Since it was his birthday celebration, his granddaughter was likely to be present, making it a perfect opportunity for them to get acquainted. Tsuna sighed, realizing he was being asked to act as a stand-in. However, he understood that his grandpa didn't have much choice. Besides, Tsuna didn't mind going to Tokyo, as he had plans to visit the city soon anyway. So, it made it convenient to combine both trips. His grandpa thanked him for his understanding, and soon, Grandma chimed in and scolded Grandpa for using Tsuna as a substitute. Tsuna warmly smiled at their playful interaction. Throughout dinner, they chatted about a variety of topics. When the meal was over, they bid each other good night. The following day, Tsuna journeyed to Tokyo with Sabas. As planned, Tsuna attended the cabinet member's birthday party. The event was held at a luxurious hotel and was brimming with life. Many influential figures from both the political and business worlds were present. Among the attendees, Tsuna recognized numerous familiar faces. He even conversed with Akashi's father before an elderly gentleman, who appeared quite amiable on the surface but radiated authority, approached him with excitement. "Hello there, young Tsuna. It's a pleasure to see you here. Where's that old man of yours? I apologize on his behalf for not being able to attend your important event. He had another commitment today and couldn't make it, so he sent me as his representative." Tsuna responded politely. He professionally matched the enthusiasm of the elderly gentleman. "Haha, who cares about that grumpy old man? Come with me, and I'll introduce you to someone." The elderly gentleman responded with a nod and a hearty laugh, leading Tsuna to another section of the banquet. Tsuna chuckled in response. Not many people had the audacity to refer to his grandpa so informally, but this old man was an exception. As Tsuna glanced at where they were headed, he figured it must be the granddaughter whom the elderly gentleman was eager to introduce to him. Soul-wise, Tsuna was pretty much an adult. He couldn't help but raise an eyebrow as he observed the bashful young girl, clearly just starting middle school. He was at a loss for words. Throughout the event, Tsuna maintained a friendly smile, though inside, he grew weary of the elderly man's relentless efforts to pair him up with the girl. It's no wonder Grandpa was irritated by that old man. He's beyond persistent, Tsuna muttered under his breath, his patience wearing thin. Sabas wore a faint, amused smile, clearly enjoying the sight of Tsuna, typically composed and poised, being pushed to his limits by the old man's dogged determination. Leaving the hotel against the elderly man's persistent invitations for dinner, Tsuna and Sabas found themselves at a school building. It was 5 p.m., and the school was mostly deserted, with students leaving by 4. With a smile, Tsuna remarked, "He must have been here, right?" He stepped out of the car and gazed at the school gate. Unexpectedly, an excited voice broke the silence. "Whoa, is that a Rolls-Royce?" A student nearby had leaned in to look at the car closer. Tsuna's eyes sparkled as he observed the student. The young man had sleek black hair combed neatly backward, with a few rebellious strands falling over his eyes. Turning to Tsuna, the student, with a friendly demeanor, inquired, "Hey there, you're not from our school, are you?" Are you looking for someone? Tuna smiled professionally and replied, indeed, I'm here to find Shintaro Midorima. At that moment, the school's gate lights flickered to life, illuminating the proud words written atop it. Shoku High. Chapter 61, Shoku High. Chapter 64, Chapter 62, he never missed. The student was clearly surprised, his eyes wide. He seemed to want confirmation. Wait, you know Shin? Yes, I do. Tuna nodded, still slightly baffled by the fact that the student had addressed Midorima with the Chan honorific. The student tilted his head to the side, displaying his confusion. Did you let him know you were coming? He should have been here to pick you up, right? Tuna shook his head gently and replied, no, I didn't tell him. I wanted to surprise him. The student, Takao, chuckled and replied, you're quite funny. Although, I can't imagine Shin being easily surprised. He introduced himself, saying, by the way, I'm Kazunari Takao. What's your name? I'm Tsunayoshi Kazama. Nice to meet you, Takao. Before Takao could ask anything else, Tuna spoke up, maintaining his friendly demeanor, and asked, anyway, where can I find him? Since you seem to know Shintaro, you might know where he is now. Takao pondered momentarily, looking towards the school before nodding and turning to Tuna. Okay, I was heading in that direction anyway. Follow me, and I'll take you there. Takao walked casually into the school grounds with his hands resting behind his head. Tuna followed Takao, taking in the sights of the school. The campus appeared quite prestigious, judging by the impressive buildings and surroundings. The school building had a unique Japanese architectural design, which, although not as modern as Tako's, possessed its own grandeur. Building a school with such intricate architecture was expensive due to the required skilled craftsmanship and high-quality materials, a testament to the institution's commitment to education and tradition. Takao couldn't help but watch Tuna curiously. It was unexpected to learn that someone like Midorima, known for his reserved personality, had a friend outside his Takao teammates. Seeing Tuna, who emitted an imposing presence despite his casual stride, brought to Takao's mind memories of encountering individuals of great influence in Japan, akin to meeting the emperor. This made him a bit cautious around Tuna. Moreover, despite Tsuna's formal attire, it was evident that he was in excellent physical shape, which piqued Takao's curiosity. He couldn't resist asking, hey, how did you come to know Shin? After hearing the question, Tuna shifted his attention from the school building to Takao, then nodded in affirmation. Yeah, we went to the same school. Takao was taken aback by this revelation and continued to inquire about Tsuna's background. To his astonishment, he discovered that Tuna had also been a basketball player. His eyes widened in disbelief as he asked, so, were you part of the generation of miracles, too? However, before Tuna could respond, Takao appeared lost in thought, muttering to himself, but I don't remember anyone like him among them. Tuna gently shook his head to break Takao from his reverie. No, I wasn't. Takao's hands dropped in disappointment. Oh, that's a shame, he said, raising his hands in a regretful gesture. With this new information, Takao assumed Tuna might have been a lesser-known player, unaware that Tuna had returned to the US. However, Takao's eyes suddenly lit up with mischief, and he asked with a mischievous grin, come on, spill the beans. Do you have any embarrassing stories about Shin? Tuna chuckled and shook his head. Midorima had always been a reserved guy, even back in middle school. He hardly ever laughed, let alone did anything embarrassing. So, Tuna had no juicy stories to share. Takao's shoulders slumped in disappointment, but they continued their conversation, with Takao mostly asking questions and Tuna sharing tidbits about his friendship with Midorima. Takao pointed toward a tall, traditional building that resembled a gymnasium and said, look over there, that's where he should be. They walked toward the building, and as they entered, the familiar sounds of basketball filled the air. The rhythmic bounce of the ball, the squeak of shoes on the court, and the shouts of players echoed through the gym. On one of the courts, a player with dark green hair, neatly parted to the left and not covering his eyes, caught a pass from a teammate. He stood confidently in the center of the court, clutching the basketball. The players on the opposing team looked frustrated as they saw the green-haired guy get the ball. They muttered in annoyance. Ugh, he's going to do it again. How can we ever win like this? He's always winning. It's so frustrating. Ignoring their comments, the green-haired player leaped gracefully into the air, his hand pulling back for a shot from the center of the court. But just as the ball was about to leave his outstretched fingers, a shadow suddenly appeared before him, causing the guy to widen his eyes in surprise. Takao was shocked, his eyes widening, as he turned to his side and realized Tsuna had disappeared. "That son of a bitch!" Takao exclaimed in disbelief. The others, both the green-haired players' team and their opponents, also widened their eyes in astonishment at the sudden appearance of this figure. But the surprise didn't last long as the ball left his hand, creating an exceptionally high arc. Everyone on the court couldn't help but be captivated by the ball's beautifully high trajectory. Bam! However, their trance was cut short by the sharp sound of the ball hitting the basket's rim instead of making a flawless entry. "What? Midorima missed!" exclaimed a player with slightly long, blonde hair parted in the middle in disbelief. "No, that's not right. Miyagi, Midorima never missed." Another player, a tall and sturdy guy with thick eyebrows and dark eyes, stood upright and disagreed. "Captain, that's exactly why I was surprised." Miyagi twitched his lips, feeling at a loss for words at Atsubo's response. "No, that's not what I meant," Atsubo said as he glanced at Tsuna, standing before Midorima, and then walked up to them. At the same time, Midorima gazed at the unexpected figure before him, a hint of disbelief in his expression. Midorima understood that Tsuna wouldn't be able to block his shot completely. However, instead of outright blocking it, Tsuna skillfully grazed the ball with the tip of his middle finger, subtly altering its trajectory and causing the shot to miss its mark narrowly. Regaining his composure, Midorima frowned slightly and addressed Tsuna, "That's quite rude of you." "My apologies, I thought it would be a good way to say hello." Tsuna simply grinned at Midorima's irritated look. He then shifted his attention to Atsubo, who was approaching with a furrowed brow. Tsuna's smile subtly transformed into a sly one. Observing Tsuna's sly expression, Midorima adjusted his glasses and squinted. It was a familiar look to him. "He hasn't changed a bit, has he?" Midorima pondered silently. He was certain Tsuna had some kind of scheme in mind. Chapter 65, Chapter 63, Friendly Match. "I didn't anticipate running into you again in Japan. It's been ages, Tsuna," Midorima commented while fixing his gaze on Tsuna, who quickly glanced at Atsubo approaching them. "It has indeed been a while. How's life treating you?" Tsuna inquired as he turned back to Midorima. "Not much has changed. How long are you planning to stay this time?" Midorima questioned, assuming Tsuna was in Japan for a brief visit. Tsuna chuckled at this and asked, "Do you recall my promise, Shintaro?" Midorima furrowed his brows in thought. "Well, we can discuss that later. Right now, I need to have a chat with your captain," Tsuna said, shaking his head slightly, then turned his attention to Atsubo, waiting for Midorima's response as he glanced at him. "Hey there! We're in the middle of a practice game here." Atsubo stepped up to Tsuna, his expression clearly showing his irritation with the interruption. Giving Tsuna a quick once-over, noticing his formal attire that looked too fancy and didn't match their school uniform, Atsubo shook his head. "You're not a student here, are you? Do you realize you're intruding? You fucker! What on earth did you just do?" Takao interjected with a mixture of frustration and bewilderment on his face. Atsubo's frown deepened at this, and Miyagi, who had just joined the scene, also wore a disapproving look. Takao remained oblivious as he carried on, "I didn't bring you here to disrupt our training. Seriously, what's going on? I thought you were friends with Shin. Why did you do that?" Miyagi seemed to lose his temper. He grabbed Takao's shoulder and hissed, "So, you're the one who brought this intruder here, huh?" Takao. Why yes." Takao suddenly snapped back to reality. He shivered involuntarily as he robotically turned his head to face Miyagi. Miyagi nodded with an angelic smile, grabbing Takao by the collar like someone taking their misbehaving pet outside. Shortly after, the gymnasium resounded with Takao's painful screams. Oddly, nobody inside paid much attention to the commotion. On the other hand, Tsuna watched the scene with an amused smile. Atsubo appeared unfazed as if he'd seen this sort of thing before. Midorima, despite a pleading look from Takao a while ago, chose to ignore the situation, pretending not to notice. "Ah, my apologies for the confusion. I'm Tsunayoshi Kazama," Tsuna responded with a professional smile as he extended his hand for a handshake. Atsubo, his frown still firmly in place, accepted the handshake but looked perplexed. I thought you were here for Midorima. Are you sure you're not here for him? Atsubo couldn't quite grasp why Tsuna, who claimed to know Midorima, sought him out. Atsubo sighed, still unsure about Tsuna's intentions. All right, you have my attention. What brings you here? Tsuna's smile remained warm as he explained, I'm the captain of Fukuda Soo Academy, and I'm here to request a friendly match with Shoku. What do you say, Captain? I thought it would be a great opportunity for our teams to play against each other. Midorima's eyes widened in recognition, and he finally remembered Tsuna's promise to return to Japan. Midorima suddenly understood Tsuna's intentions. He realized that Tsuna had interrupted their practice game to showcase his basketball skills while dressed in a formal suit and shoes. Tsuna was doing so to make Atsubo take his invitation for a friendly match seriously. However, Midorima widened his eyes as he sharply glanced at Tsuna's shoes. He could do it with these shoes. Midorima muttered under his breath, noting how Tsuna had blocked his shot despite wearing formal shoes. It surprised him, but he couldn't help but find it intriguing. His lips curled into a faint smile, and he remarked, interesting. Atsubo, still skeptical, nodded and asked, a friendly match, you say? However, he recalled that Fukuda Soo Academy was from a different city, and he raised a valid point, aren't you guys a team from Shizuoka? Why does it matter? Tsuna shook his head in response to Atsubo's question. Atsubo let out another sigh. He couldn't deny that the invitation was unusual, but Tsuna's skill was undeniable. Blocking Midorima's shot was no small feat. Atsubo knew that players like Murasakibara from the Generation of Miracles could achieve it, but not someone in a formal suit and shoes. What struck Atsubo as even more unusual was that Tsuna was clearly a first-year student. Becoming a captain within just a few weeks of enrolling in a school was unheard of. Atsubo examined Tsuna closely, trying to make sense of the situation. Tsuna's polite smile didn't put him at ease, instead, he felt an unexplained sense of threat from this seemingly unassuming newcomer. Something about Tsuna's deep, dark eyes set off his instincts. His internal alarm bells were ringing loudly. This guy is dangerous, Atsubo thought to himself. Shaking away this unnecessary thought, Atsubo turned to his team as he asked, what do you guys think? Atsubo felt relieved as the others in his team seemed nonchalant about the idea. They shrugged and responded with a casual why not. Atsubo was confident in his team. After all, Shoku had a storied history of 11 years of competition and was often referred to as the legendary king. Turning to Midorima, Atsubo asked for his opinion, to which Midorima responded with a nonchalant shrug of his shoulders and a simple I don't mind, while adjusting his glasses. Atsubo was about to delve into the specifics, like when and where the match would take place, when Tsuna interjected, seemingly anticipating his question. That sounds perfect. I'll bring my team here in a week, so be prepared, Tsuna announced confidently. In truth, Tsuna had already decided about this friendly match even before approaching Shoku. He believed that coming to a new environment and getting a new challenge would be a rare opportunity to boost his team's morale and overall mental health, which would, in turn, benefit their training and performance. Turning to Midorima, Tsuna asked, do you still have more training today? Yeah, we've got a few more drills to wrap up before cooling down, Midorima replied. I see, Tsuna nodded in understanding. He remembered there was a coffee shop right in front of the school. Let's meet up there, and I'll wait for you. Thank you for your understanding. See you later, Midorima said with a nod as Tsuna began to walk away from the court. Atsubo said, you're welcome to skip the last few drills if you'd like. Midorima shook his head. No, it's fine. I'll finish up here. He didn't want to skip his training, not after witnessing Tsuna's impressive skills. It had ignited a competitive fire within him as a faint smile crept onto his face. Midorima glanced at the bottle of perfume he had placed on the bench earlier. It was his lucky item for the day, according to OHASA horoscopes. He muttered, so, this is what OHASA horoscopes meant by Cancer will have a surprise today. As always, OHASA horoscopes proved to be accurate. Chapter 66, Chapter 64, Dropping a Bomb. After Tsuna departed, Miyagi entered the court and forcibly pulled in Takao, who looked like he'd been through a rough encounter. The rest of the team paid little attention to Takao's battered appearance, focusing instead on their training drills. Miyagi also resumed training, leaving Takao writhing in pain on the sideline. Once their training session concluded, Midorima gathered his belongings in preparation to meet Tsuna. What? We will have a friendly match against that guy we encountered earlier. Takao asked. He couldn't contain his curiosity and blurted out, he might be skilled, given what we saw, but is Fukuda Soo any good? Fukuda Soo used to be a top-tier team, but last year, they couldn't compete for some reason, chimed in a student with sharp facial features, sporting a prominent chin and high cheekbones. Curious to know more, Takao inquired, oh, Senior Kimura, you're familiar with them? But why didn't they compete last year? Do we have any information about their players? Scratching his head, Kimura responded, I don't have all the details, but it seems there were some issues within the school. They didn't provide much information about it either. The power struggle within Fukuda Soo Academy wasn't widely known to the public, not even among the folks in Shizuoka. The incident had been reduced to nothing more than a big fight at the school. Perhaps, it was because Fukuda Soo Academy had a reputation for being a rough and unruly place. Miyagi weighed in on the topic, saying, I remember they were in the competition 2 years ago. They were decent, but nothing extraordinary. I don't expect them to be much different this time. We've got a good chance at winning. Miyagi was impressed by Tsuna's skills, but he remained skeptical that one player could change the game's outcome independently. Takao, still curious, inquired further. I also heard he's from Takao. Shin, was he like a benchwarmer or something? I don't remember a guy like him on your team. A benchwarmer? Midorima took a moment to respond as he shook his head at Takao's words. Choosing his words carefully, Midorima replied, in a sense, you could say he was part of Takao. Atsubo, mopping his brow with a towel, inquired, could you elaborate on that? He was part of our starting lineup during his first year, but he had to leave for the US after that, Midorima explained. Takao was intrigued. Wait, how does he stack up against the generation of miracles now? Midorima took a moment to reflect. 3 years could significantly change a person's skills and abilities as he personally experienced them. Midorima couldn't say how much Tsuna had improved over the years or the exact details of his experiences. However, considering Tsuna's incredible potential at Takao, Midorima believed he could be on par with the generation of miracles. But he couldn't state it definitively. So, he chose his words carefully. I can't say for certain. Midorima added more seriously, however, in terms of leadership skills, he was the most formidable among us. Observing Midorima's serious demeanor as he spoke, Kimura remembered something about Tsuna. You're right. I think he mentioned he's the captain. Takao, clearly astonished, questioned this revelation. Hey? But isn't he a freshman like me? He had heard of Akashi becoming a captain at Rakuzan, but the generation of miracles were legendary in their basketball prowess. Leading such a group of exceptional players was an astonishing accomplishment. Takao couldn't quite wrap his head around it. For Akashi to become a captain made sense, given the extraordinary abilities of the generation of miracles, but Tsuna being a captain baffled him. As Midorima, ready to depart, exchanged a look with Kimura, he turned to the others and calmly explained, it's not that shocking. He continued, in the past, he was our captain. These words hit the Shoku team like a shockwave, leaving them all utterly stunned and the air filled with disbelief. Atsubo, clearly in disbelief, strained to comprehend what he had just heard, thinking he must have misheard Midorima. Wait, are you serious? He asked, seeking confirmation. Midorima, however, didn't waver. He nodded, affirming, yes, you heard me correctly. He was our captain before. Miyagi's disbelief was still etched across his face as he questioned further, but what about Akashi? He had quite the reputation. Did he just let someone else take over as captain? His sentiments were mirrored by the rest of the team, who were now hanging on to Midorima's words for an explanation. Midorima sighed and admitted, it's a long story. I'll explain another time. But during that period, Tsuna was the more suitable choice, even over Akashi. A heavy silence descended upon the gymnasium as the team members exchanged bewildered glances, grappling with the shocking news. Midorima bid his farewell and turned to leave the court with the revelation still ringing in their ears. Kimura, the first to break the silence, finally spoke up, his voice carrying a hint of urgency, I think it's clear we need to be fully prepared for the friendly match. Whatever the truth, it won't be an easy game. Atsubo, still pondering the unsettling impression Tsuna had left on him, expressed his agreement with a nod. I'm with you on that. Addressing the rest of the team, Atsubo outlined the plan. Starting tomorrow and leading to the friendly match, we'll adjust our training regimen to simulate an official game. Is anyone opposed to this? There were no objections from the team, only determined nods. Atsubo concluded, great. Let's call it a day and head home. Midorima, having left the court, walked toward the cafe just in front of the school. However, he soon noticed someone trailing behind him, and he furrowed his brows. What's your deal, Takao? Takao grinned mischievously. Your talk about that Kazama guy got me interested, Shin. Midorima's frown deepened in response. Midorima, adjusting his glasses, suggested, you should probably leave us alone. With a quizzical expression, Takao tilted his head and replied, why? He seems like a friendly guy, and I don't think he'd mind one more person joining. Midorima simply shook his head. Despite Tsuna's friendly demeanor, he didn't take kindly to strangers intruding. Midorima, knowing that this meeting was essentially a reunion and a precious time for Tsuna to catch up with old friends, understood that Tsuna might not appreciate uninvited guests. Still, he didn't stop Takao, simply saying, you can do as you please, but don't blame me if he asks you to leave. Takao laughed it off, haha, nah, he wouldn't do that, right? He was pretty confident that Tsuna wouldn't react so harshly. They stepped into the cafe and looked at Tsuna, who was accompanied by a butler standing nearby. There was no one else besides Tsuna and his butler. Midorima could clearly see Tsuna's welcoming smile transform into a frown. Unaware of the shift in the atmosphere, Takao greeted Tsuna cheerfully, hey there, I hope it's alright if I tag along. Watching Takao's back, Midorima couldn't help but shake his head inwardly, thinking, consider this a lesson, Takao. Chapter 67, Chapter 65, He's a Monster. Noticing that Midorima had brought an unexpected guest along, Tsuna furrowed his brow. However, he quickly deduced that Takao had invited himself, thanks to Midorima's disapproving headshake. In response to Takao's friendly greeting, Tsuna rose from his seat and approached Takao, placing a reassuring hand on his shoulder. You've got quite the vibrant personality. Shintaro should consider himself lucky to have someone like you around, Tsuna remarked, his face adorned with a warm smile. Takao, feeling a bit bashful, scratched his head in response. Before Takao could respond, Tsuna's amiable smile vanished, replaced by an oppressive aura that seemed to envelop Takao entirely. Tsuna's voice carried a weight that made Takao's heart race. But, we're having a reunion here, Tsuna spoke, his words laced with an undeniable authority. I hope you understand and can give us some time alone. Takao's pupils widened as he felt the sudden, overwhelming pressure bearing down on him. It was as though his very soul was being squeezed, leaving him utterly speechless with his mouth agape. Under Tsuna's intense gaze, Takao's face drained of color, his legs gave way, and he clumsily collapsed onto the floor. Midorima let out a sigh and stepped forward, breaking the tense atmosphere. That should be sufficient, don't you think? Tsuna shook his head, signaling to his butler, Sabas, to assist Takao in leaving the cafe. Sabas adeptly guided Takao out, leaving Midorima and Tsuna alone. Midorima couldn't help but glance at Takao's departing form and muttered to himself, this is why you should heed my advice. As Sabas escorted Takao out of the cafe, a group of Shoku players emerged from the school gate and noticed them. Am I seeing things, or is that a genuine butler escorting Takao? Miyagi rubbed his eyes in disbelief, voicing the question on everyone's mind. Atsubo remained silent, his expression baffled. Kimura hesitated before confirming, I'm seeing it too. Seeing a foreigner in a butler's uniform efficiently ushering Takao out of the cafe astonished them. Hey, does anyone else feel like something's off with Takao? Concerned by Takao's struggle, they exchanged puzzled glances and approached him. They tried to communicate with Sabas to find out what was going on. However, Sabas didn't speak Japanese, so he merely gestured toward the cafe's interior. The presence of Midorima and Tsuna in the cafe added to Shoku's bewilderment. They considered entering the cafe to find out what was happening, but Sabas, who had handed Takao over to them, was now stationed at the door. His presence seemed to serve as a barrier, preventing anyone from entering. Feeling uneasy about the situation, they gathered around the trembling Takao. Atsubo offered his support, helping Takao to his feet. Miyagi expressed his concern, asking, what's happening, Takao? Takao, looking as pale as a ghost, stammered out his response, I don't know. His legs still felt like jelly from the strange encounter inside the cafe. Atsubo observed the situation with a deepening frown. Can you stand up by yourself? He decided to give Takao a chance to stand on his own. Takao, however, struggled immensely, trying to find his balance. He wobbled precariously before collapsing to the ground. This sudden turn of events took aback Shotoku's players. Instinctively, they rushed to help Takao. Atsubo, being closest, reached out and caught Takao, aiding him in regaining his footing. This is strange, Takao managed to stammer, his face still drained of color. He felt his body had betrayed him, leaving him with little control. Visibly shaken and still pale, Takao addressed his teammates with a quivering voice, "That guy, he's a monster." Atsubo's eyes widened as he pivoted to look through the cafe's window at Tsuna. He couldn't shake the feeling that Takao's unsettling state had a connection to Tsuna. Inside the cafe, Tsuna nonchalantly motioned to an empty chair opposite him. "Come, have a seat," he invited calmly. Midorima settled into his chair and regarded Tsuna calmly, making a minor adjustment to his glasses. "So, what do you want to talk about?" Midorima inquired, his directness mirroring his usual approach. Tsuna gently shook his head at Midorima's no-nonsense attitude. "I was actually at your team's final game last year." Midorima raised an eyebrow. "You were? Why didn't you come and say hello?" Midorima's question prompted a subtle smile from Tsuna. "I stumbled upon someone intriguing." He paused momentarily before adding, "Besides, I didn't feel like it was the right moment to reconnect." Midorima's skepticism showed on his face. He had a hunch that Tsuna might have some ulterior motives. "Is there anyone else aware of your return?" Tsuna contemplated momentarily, his hand propping up his chin, before replying thoughtfully, "Akashi should know of this soon. I bumped into his father earlier today. But apart from you, nobody else knows." Understanding the situation, Midorima nodded, suggesting, "You should probably give the others a heads up." Tsuna dismissed the idea with a shake of his head. "I think surprising them will be more fun. By the way, can you tell me about this generation of miracles thing? It sounds quite impressive, haha." Midorima waved off the notion with a dismissive tone. "It's just some nonsense the media cooked up." A waiter approached his side, inquiring about his order. While sipping his coffee, Tsuna continued, "But your last game was quite pathetic, Shintaro. Toying with your opponents like that? You think you're a god?" Midorima's gaze grew intense upon hearing these words. Tsuna set his cup down on the table and added, "By the way, feel free to order anything from the menu. They mentioned that it's all on the house today." Midorima gave a slight, knowing shake of his head. He figured that Tsuna must have dropped a significant sum to secure the entire cafe for them. And his hunch was accurate. Tsuna had indeed paid a substantial amount to the cafe, equivalent to a month's earnings, to ensure no one else would enter. This arrangement entitled them to complimentary service for the day. Tsuna's words continued to echo in Midorima's mind as he ordered the same coffee Tsuna had been sipping. "Quite arrogant, you say?" he mused, recalling Tsuna's earlier remark. That's what Tsuna had been implying, after all. Yet, Midorima remained unswayed by this. Midorima, a man of pride, fixed a penetrating gaze on Tsuna. "In sports, empty words are as ineffectual as echoes," he asserted. It all sounded like empty rhetoric. He threw down the gauntlet. "So, demonstrate the weight of your strength and give me a reason to take your words seriously." Midorima didn't buy into Tsuna's supposed arrogance. He had climbed up the ladder through relentless training and unwavering self-belief. He had always believed that his skills would triumph over anyone and anything. Tsuna chuckled and replied, "That's precisely why I'm here. I'll show you exactly why you've been living like a frog on the bottom of a well." Midorima couldn't help but smirk, adjusting his glasses. "Let's see what you've got." Chapter 68, Chapter 66, Going to Tokyo. Tsuna and Midorima delved into various topics, including their future career paths. However, it appeared that Midorima hadn't contemplated stepping onto a broader stage due to his family's conservative nature, particularly considering their prominent status in the political realm. "You have significant responsibilities too, don't you?" Being the heir to one of the world's largest conglomerates, Midorima pointed out, raising an eyebrow. Tsuna acknowledged, "That's correct. I made an agreement with my father, allowing me a few years to pursue my interests." "I see," Midorima nodded thoughtfully, contemplating his own situation with his strict and conservative parents. "Perhaps I should attempt to discuss it with them too." In Midorima's family, basketball didn't hold much significance. They weren't particularly supportive of it but didn't oppose it outright. Their main focus was on his academic achievements, believing that his studies would reflect well on their family name if he excelled in his studies. You should, Tuna advised, reclining comfortably in his chair. Parents, even the most conservative ones, usually care deeply for their children. He reminisced about his own conservative parents in his previous life. At the same time, they may not have been the most openly supportive, but their love for him was evident, and he appreciated it even to this day. Thinking about the love he received from his family in this life, Tuna couldn't help but smile. He felt truly fortunate to have that kind of familial bond. Midorima couldn't help but feel a tinge of jealousy towards Tsuna's family. But, he quickly pushed aside this unwarranted envy and offered a gentle smile. Unbeknownst to them, a few hours had passed during their conversation when both of their phones rang, inquiring about their whereabouts. Realizing it was time to return home, Sabas drove them back. After dropping Midorima at his house, Tuna bid Midorima farewell as he continued his long drive to Shizuoka with Sabas. His business in Tokyo was now concluded. The next day, Tuna shared the news with his team, and their reactions were explosive. So, we're heading to Tokyo. No, that's not the reaction we need. We're facing off against the legendary king. This is insane, and I heard they have the shooter from the Generation of Miracles. We're really playing against the Generation of Miracles? That's incredible. Observing their responses, Tuna nodded in satisfaction. Despite their initial shock, he could see their lips curving into hopeful grins, clearly looking forward to the upcoming friendly match. Tuna felt content seeing that everyone could complete their drills without anyone feeling nauseous. He believed it was time to take their training to the next level. I can tell you're pretty pleased this morning. You had this all planned out, didn't you? Nijimura remarked, observing the team's reactions. Tuna grinned in response. It wasn't much. Agera said with a playful tone, do you think I can chew them up now, Captain? Agera had a hopeful smile on his face, but Tuna gently denied his expectations. Not quite yet. You've still got a ways to go. Tuna shifted his attention to Agera, recognizing the young man's progress. The improvement was evident when he compared Agera's current skills to when they first met during the middle school finals. And, unlike the rest of the team, Agera and Haizaki had already acclimated to the rigorous drills. Tuna had assigned them additional training to help them continue improving while the others were still working hard to adapt to the demanding regimen. Agera's shoulders drooped, and he seemed a bit disheartened. I understand. I knew it wouldn't be a walk in the park. But Tuna didn't offer any words of comfort. Instead, Agera's own determination seemed to flare up. He clenched his fist tightly and declared, all right. I'll train even harder then. Tuna watched silently as Agera joined Haizaki in his extra training, impressed by their unwavering dedication. Seeing Agera join him in training, Haizaki scowled and pushed himself harder, determined to demonstrate his superiority. Meanwhile, Agera focused intently on their exercises, their heavy breaths the only sound in the training area as they completed set after set. Nijimura sighed, observing the transformation in Haizaki. He turned to Tuna, beside him, and asked, I understand it's for the team's benefit, but how did he change so drastically? I didn't see that coming either, Tuna remarked. He shifted his gaze to the rest of the team and went on, imagine having these guys on your team. How would you feel? Nijimura paused, deep in thought, and cautiously replied, I'm not sure. Tuna grinned and responded, you'd feel a bit self-conscious, wouldn't you? Nijimura's eyes widened as the truth of Tsuna's words hit him. Observing the rest of the team, Nijimura noticed that despite their grumbling about the intensity of the training, they pushed themselves to keep up. They didn't want to be left behind, and the thought of watching Haizaki and Agera work tirelessly was motivation enough. Nijimura couldn't help but chuckle at their determination. He knew what it was like to be in their shoes, particularly during his time in the United States. When you thought Tuna was done with a training session, he'd surprise you with more. It could be quite overwhelming to train alongside Tuna, who gave his all regardless of his physical condition. They often said that talent without hard work was futile and that hard work could triumph over talent. But what if someone inherently talented worked even harder than anyone else? That person would become a formidable force akin to a monster. Faced with such a monster, Nijimura was aware of his own limitations. It wasn't so much about feeling overshadowed by Tsuna's skills, it was the simple fact of watching someone train while you idled by that made you feel guilty for not pushing yourself harder. It was akin to going to the gym and sitting there while others worked tirelessly. You'd be ashamed of yourself if you didn't train along with them. Alright, let's get back to train. Tuna chuckled and encouraged Nijimura to join the training. He couldn't let himself be outworked, and Nijimura agreed, shaking his head in good-natured resignation. Together, they continued their rigorous training regimen. The following week, the Fukuda Soo team was consumed by an intense drive to train harder than ever before. And before they knew it, the day they would face off against the legendary king, a team that now boasted a shooter from the generation of miracles, was just around the corner. As the team set off for Tokyo, Tuna ensured all the transportation arrangements were in place. However, during the journey, Tuna noticed something amiss. He saw Nijimura, his face contorted with anger, and he couldn't help but ask, "Where's Haizaki?" Chapter 69, Chapter 67, Fukuda Soo vs Shoku. He said he forgot about the friendly match, Nijimura grimly reported after ending the phone call. Tuna looked at Nijimura. He shook his head speechlessly. It seemed that Haizaki hadn't changed much. Ishida chimed in, "I actually believe him. I saw him going through the regular drills this morning even when we had to be in perfect shape for tomorrow's." Agera scratched his chin, deep in thought. "You know, I saw him too, a few hours before we left. He was in the gym, and I thought he was grabbing something he'd forgotten. Turns out, he was training so intensely that he completely forgot about the game." He slammed his hand on the seat in frustration. "Damn it, I should have gone with him. I could have trained with my best friend." "Stop being an idiot," Nijimura scolded. Nijimura gave Agera a light smack on the back of the head. He assumed Agera was going to suggest reminding Haizaki or trying to bring him along for the friendly game. He couldn't believe Agera was thinking about wanting to train alongside his best friend. Nijimura turned to Tuna, concerned. "Should we arrange another car for him?" Tuna shook his head and responded, "No need for that. Let him train by himself. After all, it's just a friendly match." Nijimura, loyal as ever, nodded in agreement, not questioning Tsuna's decision. Tuna couldn't help but feel a bit disappointed. He had thought that playing against Midorima, a member of the generation of miracles, would motivate Haizaki to showcase his skills. But it appeared that Haizaki was solely fixated on facing Akashi, the one who had wounded his pride. There might have been another member of the generation of miracles that Haizaki was eager to face, but they weren't up against that player yet. Tuna sighed as he glanced at Agera, who was still complaining about missing 2 hours of training during their journey. He couldn't help but think, Shizuoka seems to have a talent for making people hold grudges against him. Hey! Akashi had discarded Haizaki like he was nothing, while Agera had been treated as a plaything. In some ways, they shared a similar fate. What kind of best friend am I? Leaving my best friend to train on his own? Damn, I'll make it up by running 100 laps alongside you later, Haizaki. But when Agera referred to Haizaki as his best friend, Tuna couldn't help but let out another sigh. He found it hard to describe how airhead Agera could be, and he was left somewhat speechless by it all. After a little over 2 hours, they finally reached Tokyo. When they arrived at their accommodation, which was essentially Tsuna's residence in Tokyo, they were taken aback by its sheer luxury. They turned to Tuna with wide-eyed surprise. They had always known Tuna was wealthy, given his constant companion, Sabas the butler. However, seeing a glimpse of his wealth in person left them genuinely astonished. Sabas then guided them to their accommodations for the day. The next day, they stood in front of Shoku High School. "Wow, this place looks amazing. Legendary King's School indeed," one of them exclaimed. "Our school is like a tiny speck compared to this," another chimed in, marveling at the grandeur of Shoku. The team was genuinely shocked by the sight of the traditional and prestigious-looking school. It was a stark contrast to what they were accustomed to. "Oh, you guys finally arrived." Their awe-filled conversation was abruptly halted when Atsubo, accompanied by Miyagi, approached them with a warm greeting. Tuna grinned and asked, "We didn't keep you waiting, did we?" Atsubo reassured him, "No, not at all. Actually, you're a bit ahead of schedule. Follow me, I'll lead the way." Although Atsubo appeared friendly on the surface, there was an underlying wariness in his demeanor due to what had happened with Takao. Miyagi shared this caution, and his distrust was evident in his guarded expression as they followed Tuna. Nijimura, walking alongside Tuna, leaned in and quietly asked, "Young master, did you mess with them somehow?" Tsuna responded with a casual shake of his head. "No, I didn't do anything." Nijimura couldn't shake off his suspicions. He cast doubtful glances between Tsuna and the two Shoku players, narrowing his eyes as he tried to figure out the mystery. The members of the Fukuda Soo team, including Agera, gazed around the school building in wonder as they walked. Atsubo couldn't help but notice something rather unique. He sneakily glanced at them and couldn't help but think, being a first-year captain is quite impressive, but it seems like everyone's perfectly fine with it. But that wasn't the only thing that bothered Atsubo. He noticed that Tsuna and Nijimura led the group while the others followed closely, almost like an organized military formation. The scene reminded him of a king and his trusted advisor touring the land with their loyal soldiers in tow. It left him feeling somewhat uneasy. Atsubo brushed aside his unnecessary thoughts as they reached the gymnasium. Once the members of the Fukuda Soo team stepped inside, they instantly became the center of attention. Tsuna calmly surveyed the gym, seemingly unfazed by the curious stares. His jersey bore the number 4, and it was clear that many of the other players were fixated on him. "Is that guy their captain? I thought he was friends with Midorima, so he must be a freshman, right?" "He's a freshman? Are they playing or what?" Aside from the Shoku regulars he had met previously, not everyone knew he was the captain. These unfamiliar faces held the most skepticism about it. Takao, who stood next to Midorima, visibly flinched upon seeing Tsuna. "Senior." Midorima, looking surprised, voiced his recognition as he saw Nijimura from Fukuda Soo. "Shin, you know him?" Takao, who stood beside Midorima, couldn't resist asking. Nijimura exchanged a glance with Tsuna, who simply responded with a nod. Nijimura then approached Midorima. After all, they had been on the same team before, so greeting each other was the least they could do. A middle-aged man with neatly combed black hair, which extended to the sides and barely touched his earlobes, seemed to pick up on the subtle exchange between Nijimura and Tsuna. He thought to himself, "I've heard of him from Atsubo, but this young man appears to be even more formidable than the rumors suggest." Just from that discreet interaction between Nijimura and Tsuna, he could discern that Tsuna held absolute authority within the team. Shaking his head in slight amazement, he approached Tsuna and extended his hand for a handshake. "Hello there, my name is Masaki Nakatani. I serve as Shotoku's coach. I was planning to greet your coach, but it seems he's not here. Could you kindly inform me if he will join us for today's friendly game?" Accepting the handshake with a friendly smile, Tsuna responded, "Ah, there might be some confusion. We don't currently have a coach." "What?" Nakatani looked genuinely surprised at this revelation. Chapter 70, Chapter 68, The Game Starts. Surprised by the revelation that Fukuda Soo had no coach, Nakatani was initially taken aback. He looked for any signs of jest in Tsuna's words but found none. "I see, that's quite unexpected. But anyway, one of my team members will show you where you can sit. And feel free to warm up. We're going to start the game in 30 minutes, Nakatani said, shaking his head in mild disbelief. He motioned for one of Shotoku's reserve players to guide Fukuda Soo to their bench before returning to his team. Tsuna signaled for the rest of his team to follow him as they moved toward their designated seating area. It was evident that Shotoku had made thorough preparations for today's friendly match. Once Tsuna had settled into his seat, the rest of the team followed suit, focusing on their captain. They had already received a briefing on their game plan earlier. "We'll stick with our plan. You will be marking Shintaro for this." Turning to Mochizuki, Tsuna instructed. Mochizuki, upon hearing the instructions, nodded in acknowledgement. "Got it, Captain. But just so you know, he's way better than me." Tsuna gave a knowing nod. He was well aware of Midorima's skills. However, Mochizuki's role was primarily to keep Midorima occupied. Ishida chimed in, shaking his head slightly. "Mochizuki, you should give it your best shot." Tsuna continued with the game plan. "Ishida, you'll step up as the point guard. Since Haizaki is absent, Agera will take his place for now. I'll play as the power forward." As Haizaki's name was mentioned, the team couldn't help but feel frustrated, and Nijimura shook his head while agreeing. "Nijimura, you'll stick to your usual role," Tsuna instructed. Nijimura nodded in response. "Got it." Although he was a power forward at Takao, Tsuna had thought it through and decided to place him as the center. Tsuna didn't make this decision lightly. Playing as the center required great strength as they were crucial for the team's defense. Nijimura's martial arts background had made him physically stronger than ever before. So, he was perfect for the role. Meanwhile, on Shotoku's bench, Nakatani rubbed his chin thoughtfully while observing Fukuda Sogo's team. It looks like they really don't have a coach. That young captain seems to be handling both roles, Nakatani remarked, voicing his observations aloud. His fellow Shotoku members listened attentively. Let's focus on figuring out their strategy. We don't have any data on how they play, Nakatani decided. Atsubo, understanding the plan, nodded in agreement. However, Midorima had a different idea, and he spoke up suddenly, Coach Nakatani, would it be possible to run most of the plays through me in the first quarter? Nakatani squinted his eyes at Midorima, taken aback by the request. The rest of the team looked equally surprised. Miyagi placed a hand on Midorima's shoulder and whispered, "Freshman, are you trying to get yourself killed today?" Midorima shivered a bit but kept his composure. He glanced at Miyagi and said, "I understand that my request may have been a bit much, but would you mind letting go of my shoulder? I don't like being touched." Miyagi was taken aback. "What did you say?" He released Midorima's shoulder, but anger was written all over his face, and he seemed ready to confront Midorima physically. However, Takao stepped in quickly, trying to calm Miyagi down. "Haha, senior, please hold off beating this self-centered guy for now. We have a guest." Nakatani didn't seem bothered by the idea and agreed, "All right then, we'll focus on getting points from Midorima later." Atsubo, looking a bit baffled, nodded in agreement. He placed his hand on Midorima's shoulder and said, "I'll follow the coach's plan, but let's be clear, I'm doing it for the team. Don't forget that, freshman." Midorima, adjusting his glasses, replied, "I appreciate your understanding." But then he added, "By the way, could you please remove your hand?" Atsubo shrugged and released Midorima's shoulder. Miyagi appeared even more determined to confront Midorima after these words, with Takao and Kimura working together to restrain him. Midorima's face remained mostly impassive, but upon closer inspection, one could notice a thin sheen of sweat on his forehead in response to Miyagi's intense reaction. On Fukuda Sogo's bench, Tuna shared his insights. Typically, they prefer a slower pace. He then shifted his gaze to Midorima and added, "But I have a hunch they might throw a curveball at us this time. All right, let's get warmed up. If any adjustments are needed during the game, I'll call for them." With that, Tuna rose, and the rest followed suit. Their warm-up routine was straightforward, some basic stretches, 5 layups each, 10 shots at the basket, and then taking turns passing the ball among themselves. Once they completed their assigned tasks, they could practice as they pleased. Shotoku had wrapped up their own briefing and began streaming onto the court for their warm-up. Their routine mainly involved stretching and some ball handling drills. Miyagi, watching Fukuda Sogo's warm-up, muttered to Kimura, "These guys give me the creeps." Kimura nodded, "They've got a strong foundation." Atsubo, looking rather perplexed, turned to Midorima and asked, "So, that guy over there was also your former captain? How many captains did you guys have?" Takao, standing beside Atsubo, couldn't hold back a chuckle. Midorima explained, "Well, it's a bit complicated. Senior Nijimura voluntarily stepped down as captain, and Tuna took over. Then when Tuna had to go back to the States, the captaincy returned to Senior." Atsubo rubbed his temples, clearly feeling the weight of the complex history at Takao. Takao chuckled and tried to ease the mood, saying, "Captain, don't stress over it too much. Takao was a bit of a crazy place back then. Full of surprises, you know." He quickly changed his tone and added with determination, "Let's concentrate on this game and win." Midorima adjusted his glasses and nodded. After a solid half-hour of warm-up, both teams took their positions on the court, a palpable tension hanging in the air. Standing at the center of the court, the referee prepared to toss the ball into the air. With both teams ready for the jump ball, the referee threw it up high, and Atsubo expertly gained control for Shotoku. He quickly passed the ball to a teammate, signaling them to move forward as they prepared for their offensive play. The pass ended up in the hands of Midorima, who stood at the court's center. Nijimura couldn't help but wonder why Midorima wasn't budging from his spot. "He's gonna shoot from there." However, this puzzle was quickly solved as Midorima shifted into his shooting stance and leaped into the air. The ball left his hands in a graceful, high arc. The sheer elegance of the ball's trajectory captivated the Fukuda Soo players as they watched it gracefully float through the air. The ball swished flawlessly through the net, finally breaking the silence. Fukuda Soo's players, stunned by the incredible shot, blinked back to reality and stared at Midorima in disbelief. He can make shots from that distance. Is this the famous shooter from the generation of miracles? Tuna couldn't help but chuckle as he looked at Midorima's smirk, his smile showing a hint of amusement. What a way to kick off the game, Shintaro. Chapter 71, Chapter 69, It only takes him one game. Midorima was renowned for turning away before his shots even landed, but this time, he remained unwavering in his stance, his eyes locked on Tsuna, as if issuing a challenge. Nakatani, observing from the bench, quietly contemplated, seems like he's really looking forward to facing that young captain. Wow, that was an amazing shot, as always, Shin. Takao cheered, his eyes glued to the ball that had just effortlessly glided through the net. Midorima adjusted his glasses and confidently replied, of course. I've got my lucky item today. My shots won't miss. Simultaneously, Tsuna signaled to his team, suggesting a slight shift in their strategy. Let's give it a shot. Nijimura expressed his concern, are you sure? Some of them might struggle to keep pace. Tsuna dismissed the worry with a shake of his head. If they can't keep up, then all that rigorous training would be in vain. All right, Nijimura conceded, returning to his position. The game pressed on, with Tsuna taking control of the ball. He swiftly dribbled it, leading Fukuda Soo's advance down the court. His teammates followed in a determined march. Atsubo was tasked with guarding Tsuna, but the young captain's speed left him astounded as Tsuna glided past him. Atsubo couldn't conceal his surprise, muttering, he's incredibly fast. Shizuoka reacted swiftly to this unexpected display. Miyagi rushed in to provide support and block Tsuna's path. Seems like the legendary king lives up to his name, Tsuna remarked with a smirk, and his dribbling pace suddenly escalated. This change in speed caught Miyagi off guard, and he struggled to keep up with the ball. But Tsuna suddenly paused as he stood still, shook his head, and looked at Miyagi, who was giving his all to defend him. Why are you so persistent when I don't have the ball? What? Miyagi couldn't wrap his head around it when Tsuna mentioned something unusual. But sure enough, the ball had vanished from Tsuna's hand. Senior! The ball! Takao shouted as he rushed toward Ishida, who had somehow come into possession of the ball. Ishida was initially taken aback but quickly regained his composure and took a shot, earning their team 2 points. Observing this, Miyagi muttered, when did he pass the ball? Tsuna paid no attention to Miyagi's confusion as he returned to his position with his team. Atsubo, who was closest to Miyagi, patted him on the shoulder, saying, don't worry about it, Miyagi. But even as Atsubo offered reassurance, he couldn't help narrowing his gaze as he watched Tsuna closely. It had been an unexpected pass, swift as a lightning bolt, leaving the defender bewildered and unaware that the ball had already left Tsuna's hands. Midorima adjusted his glasses as he observed Tsuna's actions closely. He had keenly noticed what Tsuna had just pulled off. Tsuna dribbled the ball at such a blazing pace that it was almost impossible for anyone to keep up. Even Miyagi, who had tried to track the ball's movements, struggled to keep pace. Tsuna, however, executed a clever move. He released the ball while continuing the dribbling motion, creating the illusion that he still possessed it. But what caught Midorima's attention was the surprise on Tsuna's teammate's face, which made him furrow his eyebrows as he contemplated this unexpected turn of events. Nevertheless, 3 points still beat 2, Midorima remarked, receiving the ball from Shizuoka's defensive zone. He smoothly transitioned into a shooting stance and leaped into the air. The ball soared high, tracing a perfect arc, and effortlessly sailed through the net. While the ball was in flight, Midorima continued speaking, his tone carrying a hint of provocation, no matter how flashy your moves may be, we'll still come out on top if you stick to this. Agera couldn't contain his surprise, muttering in disbelief, did he just shoot from their own defensive line? He directed his gaze toward Midorima, who locked eyes with Tsuna, his challenge evident. Agera's murmurs persisted as he turned to Tsuna. The provocation from Midorima did not affect Tsuna, who remained composed as he dribbled the ball with precision. I suppose that's why the captain says I've got more work to do. That guy's a total beast, while I'm your run-of-the-mill player, Agera mumbled. However, he had a new determination, like a young warrior seeking challenges from a seasoned master, and he wore a wide, confident smirk. Feeling the sudden shift in his atmosphere, Tsuna's eyes widened slightly at the transformation in Agera's attitude, and he couldn't help but chuckle. Should I consider this a win on my gamble? Looks like we've got another card to play. This is turning into quite a fun game, Tsuna added, smirking as he signaled for his teammates to match his pace. Together, they advanced down the court, dribbling the ball with renewed determination. Tsuna effortlessly weaved through Shizuoka's defense, his agility and precision akin to a knife slicing through soft tofu. But weirdly enough, Tsuna had never hogged the spotlight. He relied on unconventional passing techniques to set up his teammates for the score. Shizuoka, being the seasoned team they were, anticipated Tsuna's passes. Whenever the ball seemed to vanish from his hands, they reacted swiftly, attempting to block Fukuda Soo's scoring opportunities. But their efforts were in vain. Fukuda Soo continued to rack up points, thanks to Tsuna's unorthodox passes that kept Shizuoka's defense on their toes. The same could be said for Midorima's three-pointers. No matter how hard Mochizuki tried to mark him, Midorima always found a way to sink those long shots. As the first quarter came to a close, the scoreboard scored 24-36, with Shizuoka in the lead. Midorima approached Tsuna, who was heading towards the bench. He couldn't contain his annoyance, feeling like Tsuna wasn't giving it his all. Midorima spoke up, "Is that all you've got, Tsuna? If that's the case, it's quite disappointing. Seems like you're misunderstanding something here, Shintaro." Tsuna couldn't help but shake his head, a faint smirk on his lips. Midorima's frown deepened at Tsuna's smirk. He had learned to associate that expression with Tsuna scheming something. But Tsuna quickly reassured him, walking towards Fukuda Soo's bench. He called back to Midorima, "Don't worry, Shintaro. I won't make it easy for you to shoot in the next quarter." Watching Tsuna's retreating figure, Midorima sighed and returned to his team's bench, accompanied by his teammates. Takao scratched his head, a puzzled expression on his face. "I don't want to sound ungrateful, but does this seem too easy?" Miyagi didn't hold back, smacking Takao on the head. "Too easy? We couldn't even stop them once." Takao held his throbbing head, defending himself. No, that's not what I meant. I'm just surprised they're not putting up more of a fight against Shin." Atsubo chimed in, sharing the same concern. He turned to Midorima, questioning, "Is he really your former captain, Shin?" There was doubt in the air about Tsuna's leadership at Takao. While Fukuda Soo's attacks were formidable, it was surprising that Tsuna hadn't attempted to counter Midorima's shots. Midorima squinted at Tsuna across the court, his expression growing serious. "Do you all know how many games it took for Tsuna to take over Takao?" He adjusted his glasses with purpose, his tone intense. "Just one game." Midorima's words stirred memories of a game against Hibiya that he hadn't personally witnessed but knew well. The outcome of that match spoke volumes. Tsuna had managed to assert his dominance over the team and seize the leadership role without the senior players even voicing displeasure. It was clear to Midorima that Tsuna possessed a skill and strategy beyond the ordinary. What? The others from Shizuoka were in disbelief at this revelation. It was becoming evident that Tsuna had calculated every move carefully, and there was likely more to his approach than met the eye. Chapter 72, Chapter 70, Stopping Midorima. Kimura voiced the question that was on everyone's mind. Why didn't he make any effort to stop Midorima? Nakatani, the Shizuoka coach, let out a weary sigh as he responded, "He's been using us since the very beginning." This revelation left the Shizuoka team, including Midorima, perplexed. Midorima's eyes widened as realization dawned upon him. "So, that's why they seemed so sloppy at first." Nakatani nodded, elaborating, "Indeed. They clearly weren't accustomed to the young captain's playing style initially. But as the first quarter neared its end, they began to adapt, and their teamwork improved." A hushed atmosphere enveloped the Shizuoka's bench as the truth settled in. Atsubo, wearing a perplexed expression, finally voiced the team's shared disbelief. "So, are you suggesting that he deliberately ignored Midorima just to make his team adapt to a different style of play?" Nakatani leaned forward, his eyes fixed on Tsuna, casually sipping from a water bottle. "In a sense, he's using us as the perfect practice opponents, a training dummy." Shizuoka's players couldn't help but clench their fists in frustration. They were the legendary kings, and the knowledge that they were being used as a mere practice tool stoked the fires of their prideful spirit. As Midorima locked his determined gaze on Fukuda Soo across the court, he balled his fist, his resolve burning like a fierce fire. Witnessing his team's evident frustration, Nakatani raised his hand to draw their attention. In the next quarter, stick to our rhythm. They might have more surprises, so we'll focus on defense and hold our lead. Shotoku's players nodded resolutely, their eyes gleaming with determination. They were determined to show Fukuda Sogo the true prowess of a team that had been a top contender in Japan for 11 consecutive years. Back in Fukuda Sogo's camp, Tuna noticed his team's unwavering spirit despite the score difference. He nodded approvingly and addressed them, "We'll tweak our game plan in the next quarter." Acknowledging their previous adaptation to his passes, Tuna commended their efforts, saying, "You guys did great in the first quarter. Now, our focus is on shutting down Midorima and closing the score gap." "Mochizuki, we're switching positions." Mochizuki consented, looking intently at Tuna, who then turned to Agera. "Agera, you're with me on marking Shintaro," Tuna instructed with determination. Agera blinked in surprise, pointing at himself as he asked, "Me? Are you sure I can handle it?" Full of assurance, Tuna shook his head and encouraged him, "Maybe not yet, but you'll surprise yourself. Trust your instincts and keep your focus on the ball." Nijimura found himself puzzled by this choice. His hidden skills could have been a surefire way to shut down Midorima. Nevertheless, he harbored full trust in Tsuna's decision, and without questioning it, he nodded along. "Okay, I'll give it a shot," Agera responded, his confidence gradually rising. "Let's pick up our pace a bit, treat this like a stamina drill." "Noted." The team chorused in agreement, their voices in unison. The second quarter began, and Tuna dribbled the ball casually, his eyes connecting with his teammates. With a synchronicity that resembled a well-rehearsed military operation, they responded to Tsuna's sudden shift in speed, moving as one unit. Tuna effortlessly weaved through Shotoku's defense. Atsubo and Miyagi shared a knowing look, fully prepared for Tsuna's unpredictable passes. Seeing this, Tuna couldn't help but smirk, "That's rather adorable." Midorima, noticing Tsuna's smirk, sensed that something was amiss and attempted to caution his teammates. But he was too slow, and Tuna, who had been distributing the ball to his teammates throughout the first quarter, quickly dribbled forward. Shotoku's players, who tried to halt him, were left behind in the dust as Tuna executed a thunderous dunk that reverberated through the entire court. On the sidelines, Nakatani also rose to his feet. During the first half, Tuna had been distributing the ball to help his team adjust to the unconventional plays and his unpredictable passes. However, the question arose, what if he had already succeeded in making his teammates comfortable with these passes? Nakatani frowned as he settled back into his seat. Takao, somewhat at a loss for words, mumbled, "He can pull that off too, hey." It was quite an uncomfortable realization for Shotoku that they had essentially served as a training tool for Fukuda Sogo. The fact that Tuna had been giving his team time to adapt was a double-edged sword. While it helped Fukuda Sogo, it also allowed their opponents, Shotoku, to become accustomed to their style of play. After all, Shotoku was a top-tier team, and they were quick to adapt to the tempo. However, Tsuna's latest move showed that the training phase was over. Atsubo wondered if Tuna was finally going all out. As the game progressed and he saw Tuna marking Midorima alongside Agera, he considered, double-teaming, "Hey? That's a smart strategy. But remember, Midorima isn't your average shooter." Midorima held the ball, his eyes locked on Tuna, who had a confident smirk on his face. "You think you can block my shot?" He adjusted his form. Midorima prepared to shoot but noticed Tsuna's lightning-fast reflexes. Tsuna's hand nearly swiped the ball from him, leaving Midorima surprised as he stepped back. The other Shotoku players were equally astonished by this incredible display of skill. Midorima marveled at Tsuna's speed. "You're capable of that, hey?" he whispered to himself. Midorima, holding his personal philosophy that obstacles could be conquered, decided to change his dribbling pace. Fukuda Sogo was taken aback by his excellent dribbling skills, which they hadn't expected. Midorima's newfound speed allowed him to blow past Tsuna's defense. Agera, who was assisting Tuna in guarding Midorima, reacted swiftly, but it wasn't sufficient. Midorima released the ball from his grip, executing yet another perfect shot. Midorima furrowed his brow, sensing something unsettling, but he brushed it off and continued scoring repeatedly. Shotoku found it challenging to halt Tsuna's relentless attacks, yet on the other side, Midorima was equally unstoppable. Fukuda Sogo struggled to contain his scoring spree. Agera couldn't conceal his frustration, muttering in disbelief, this guy's supposed to be a shooter, but he's moving like lightning. It's unbelievable. Agera, regaining his composure, took a deep breath and redirected his focus to the game. He reminded himself, stay focused, trust your instincts. His newfound calmness was evident. Observing this change, Tuna silently acknowledged, good, trust your instincts. Don't let me down. The game pressed on, with Midorima once again in possession of the ball. As usual, Tuna was there, prepared to stop him. If this is what you meant by not making it easy for me, then, I'm quite disappointed, Tuna. Midorima taunted as he breezed past Tsuna's defense, aiming for another shot. Without rising to the bait, Tuna focused on Midorima's towering presence and said, I appreciate you, Shintaro. Thanks to you. With a slow, cunning smile, Tuna added, his gaze fixed on a blurred figure. As if appearing out of thin air, this figure swiftly closed in on Midorima, extending a hand to snatch the ball away. We've awakened a beast in our team. Midorima's eyes widened in disbelief as he felt a sudden tug on the ball, causing it to slip from his grasp. He stared in surprise at the one responsible. This guy. It was Agera. This time, he had successfully disrupted Midorima's shot. Chapter 73, Chapter 71, it was all planned. Tuna grabbed the ball that had slipped from Midorima's grip and smoothly added another point to his team's score. As he made his way back to his teammates, Tuna passed by Midorima, who couldn't hold back his frustration any longer. How dare you? Midorima seated, his anger palpable. He glared at Tuna, who appeared utterly nonchalant, while through gritted teeth, he questioned, do you even take this game seriously? Tuna had essentially used himself as a practice tool for Agera. This audacity, the notion that he'd been underestimated, didn't sit well with Midorima's pride. Tuna shook his head slightly in response to Midorima's frustration. I'm taking this game seriously. Do you think we took this game as a joke and didn't want to win it? Aren't you a little too arrogant? Midorima fell into silence, his pride somewhat wounded. Tuna walked away, adding with quiet confidence, Shintaro, it's been tough for you, but we'll win this game. Observing Tsuna's retreating figure, Midorima muttered with an angry gleam in his eyes, win, he says. As he returned to his defensive position, Tuna was met by Nijimura, who was grinning. So that's why you recruited him, huh? You saw something in him. It was quite unexpected that Agera could unleash this inner beastly instinct without any proper training to unlock it. It suggested that Agera had a natural talent for it, and his potential was pretty impressive. However, Tuna tilted his head, replying, actually, I was just as surprised as you. Nijimura was left momentarily speechless. Had Tuna really taken a gamble on Agera? It seemed like a rather bold move. But the game carried on, leaving no room for arguments. During the second quarter, Midorima's shots were largely contained. Fukuda Soo began to close the point gap. Tuna and Agera continued to shadow Midorima. Agera, who had a shaky start, now moved precisely, intercepting and stealing the ball from Midorima at the perfect moments. As the second quarter ended, the score was 47-52 in favor of Shoku, but the gap had narrowed considerably. The halftime break arrived, and both teams rested on their respective benches. Ishida playfully patted Agera's shoulder. You know, freshman, you're really good out there. Impressive stuff. Agera blushed slightly, not used to receiving compliments. Tuna wore a calm smile. Now, they should realize that focusing on Midorima won't work anymore. Agera, this time, you'll mark Takao. He's a capable player with excellent passes. Try to keep him in check, Tuna continued, earning puzzled looks from the team. Why? Wouldn't it be better to double-team Midorima with you? Agera looked puzzled, and his question mirrored the confusion on his teammates' faces. But Nijimura, who had the longest history with Tuna, couldn't help but scoff. Ha! How do you think a shooter like Midorima could break Tuna's defense? Isn't it because Midorima's surprisingly quick and skilled at dribbling for a shooter? I mean, he's one of the generation of miracles for a reason, right? Agera cautiously responded. Nijimura's response was a playful smack on Agera's back, accompanied by a meaningful smirk. Of course not, you dummy. Nijimura said, he moved past Tuna's defense because Tuna allowed it. The revelation left the others in wide-eyed disbelief. Tuna shook his head and continued, saying simply, I'll take on Midorima myself this time. Looking at Nijimura, Tuna mentioned Itsubo and Kimura before asking, "Think you can handle these two?" Nijimura responded with a confident smirk, "If I can't handle them, I'd rather retire." While Nijimura appeared lean, while being an athlete, he was also an active martial artist, which endowed him with a unique blend of strength and agility that set him apart from regular athletes. His physique was sculpted to perfection through rigorous training. In terms of raw power, although Itsubo and Kimura boasted larger and taller builds, Nijimura held unwavering confidence in his abilities. Upon hearing Nijimura's response, Tuna also donned a confident smirk, his gaze fixed on the Shoku team across the court. On the Shoku side, a heavy silence settled in. Frustration filled every player as they realized they were still pawns in the opponent's scheme. They had hoped to face their rivals full strength but instead found themselves being treated as a training dummy. The most aggravating part was their inability to prevent this from happening. It was like they were walking right into their opponent's trap. Nakatani, determined to lift his team's spirits, took charge. He spoke up, "All right, let's put the past behind us. In the next quarter, our focus is scoring from within." His eyes landed on Takao, and he placed his trust in the young player. "Takao, we depend on you for the offense this time." His words resonated with the team, and they nodded in agreement, ready to shift their focus for the upcoming quarter. As the break finished, both teams went back on the court. "All right, Takao, let's work together to shut down their attack," Itsubo instructed Takao. He knew a well-timed play could disrupt Tuna and lead to a potential steal, especially with Takao's eagle eye. Takao responded with determination, "Got it, Captain." Conversely, in the Fukuda Soo team, Agera observed Tuna walking ahead of him. He turned to Nijimura, who was at his side and voiced his concerns, "Senior, if I can't intercept Midorima as captain planned, it could spell trouble. Why did he place such trust in me for this critical role?" Nijimura comforted Agera by patting him on the shoulder. "Don't dwell on it. The important thing is you succeeded, right?" Agera still felt the weight of the responsibility. "But what if I didn't make it?" Nijimura let out a frustrated sigh and scratched his neck. "Look, it's just a friendly match. Failing in this kind of game is no big deal. At worst, Tuna would give you extra training if you didn't make it." Agera quietly mused, "Wouldn't that be more like a reward than a punishment?" Nijimura was puzzled by Agera's muttering. "What did you say?" But the game had already resumed before Agera could clarify. Nijimura just shook his head, thinking that Agera had a strange way of looking at things, and refocused on the match. As the game pressed on, Shoku began an aggressive attack. In possession of the ball, Takao activated his eagle eye, scanning the entire court for opportunities. He then shot a surprised look at Tuna, who single-handedly marked Midorima, leaving Takao intrigued. Noticing Agera was now assigned to him, Takao pondered in silence, what is he scheming this time? However, he shook his head lightly, following instructions as he positioned himself within Fukuda Soo's defensive line. Agera, though, was like a shadow, tightly tracking his every move. Takao couldn't easily bypass Agera's defense, and this prompted a surprised reaction, making him step back and click his tongue in frustration. He exchanged meaningful glances with Itsubo, their silent communication evident. In sync, they both nodded. Takao swiftly passed the ball to Midorima, who had only Tuna marking him. Chapter 74, Chapter 72, Winning Against the Legendary King. Midorima tightly gripped the ball, and Tuna edged closer, assuming a defensive stance. With deliberate composure, Midorima began, "I'm not sure what game you're playing, but if you think marking me alone will work, you're in for a surprise." Maintaining a steadfast defensive posture, Tuna responded nonchalantly as Midorima dribbled the ball and maintained a calculated distance, "Shintaro, I respect your pride, but aren't you mistaking it with something else?" Midorima scoffed at the remark. Midorima raised his gaze towards the basket, but before he could take the shot, he found Tsuna's hand blocking his vision. "So, that's why he closed the distance between us, hey?" Understanding Tsuna's strategy, Midorima realized he couldn't shoot haphazardly with his sight obscured. He was always calculated and precise. Attempting to adjust his dribbling pace, Midorima was shocked. Tsuna's defense was impeccable, tracking his every move and continuously obstructing his field of view. "Let me tell you this." Tuna leaned in closer, his voice steady and low, as Midorima struggled in his grip, attempting to break free. Midorima's efforts to escape were in vain as Tuna swiftly moved, swiping the ball from Midorima's grasp with lightning speed. Tsuna continued a hint of challenge, saying, "I admit, Shintaro. Your dribbling is impressive for a 3-point specialist. But, aren't you being too arrogant? Would you even get past me if I didn't allow you to?" With the ball in his possession, Tsuna quickly broke away and made a beeline for the hoop, seizing the opportunity to execute a powerful dunk. Midorima was left speechless, trying to absorb Tsuna's words. Though less thunderous than the previous one, the dunk reverberated through the collective psyche of Shotoku's players. In utter disbelief, they fixed their gazes on Tsuna. Tsuna said to Midorima, still wide-eyed, "From this moment on, I won't let you score another point." "That's one way to stifle a shooter," Nakatani murmured quietly from the sidelines. It was a technique fraught with risk, demanding swift reactions and agility, and always carried the threat of fouling the shooter. Surveying the challenging predicament facing Shotoku, Nakatani sighed, his eyes trained on Tsuna on the court. He couldn't help but reflect, Midorima's already a beast, but it looks like that young captain might be an even bigger one. Being gifted was one thing, but knowing how to exploit that talent to its fullest was another level entirely. As the game pressed on, Shotoku faced a dire situation. When Midorima had an open shot, Tsuna did something extraordinary in a crucial moment. Instead of challenging the shot directly, which was already daunting, he extended his hand to obstruct Midorima's line of sight. The consequence was astonishing. Midorima's signature high-arching shot, which had been an almost guaranteed basket throughout middle school, went awry. It missed the basket entirely, ricocheting off the backboard and astounded everyone on the court. This was unprecedented. Midorima had never missed a shot since his middle school days, not once, not without some formidable defense to blame. Observing Midorima's perplexed expression, Tsuna shook his head. Tsuna employed a trick he had picked up from an NBA game. He knew it was particularly effective when dealing with someone as meticulous as Midorima, who never liked taking uncertain shots. The trick was straightforward but cunning. By obstructing Midorima's line of sight with his hand, Tsuna planted a seed of unease in the perfectionist shooter's mind. Midorima, who valued precision above all, was now reluctant to take the shot. The weight of the miss was a blow to his pride. And just as Tsuna anticipated, Midorima chose not to risk another uncertain shot. Tsuna capitalized on this hesitation, smoothly swiping the ball from him. Together with his team, they began accumulating points, orchestrating a remarkable turnaround in the score. In some instances, Tsuna couldn't snatch the ball from Midorima, and he successfully passed it to his teammates. However, breaking through Fukuda Soo's solid defense was still proving to be a challenge. Atsubo and Kimura were having a particularly tough time. Whenever they found themselves under the basket, they felt like they were a mere step away from narrowing the score gap. Yet, Nijimura, who combined agility with brute strength, thwarted most of their attempts to catch up. As the third quarter ended, the scoreboard showed a considerable disparity, with Fukuda Soo leading 73-58. The atmosphere on Shotoku's bench during the break was subdued, as they had only managed to score 6 points during the third quarter. Nakatani then instructed the team to lock in on their defense, specifically focusing on Tsuna. He emphasized recognizing Fukuda Soo's strategies and taking opportunities to counterattack. Their goal was to make it tougher for Fukuda Soo to score. They had studied their playing style well. Meanwhile, Tsuna's message was straightforward. He urged them to stick to their current rhythm. With the final quarter underway, Fukuda Soo came out strong on offense. Tsuna, holding the ball, observed Atsubo and Takao marking him closely. Atsubo confidently announced, "Just like you've shut down Midorima, we're going to stop you." Tsuna's gaze intensified, and in an instant, he burst forward, leaving Atsubo struggling to keep up with his quick moves. But as he was about to regain his balance, Tsuna was surprised when Takao swiftly moved in from the side, his hand poised to steal the ball. Tsuna had to react fast, taking a step back to maintain control of the ball. The court was charged with energy as the defense and offense clashed. Takao brimmed with determination as he declared, "You won't get past us now." Seizing the moment, Atsubo rejoined the defense against Tsuna, while Takao kept a close eye on Tsuna's every move. Tsuna couldn't help but smile at the spirited challenge, saying, "You guys don't waste any time, do you?" Shotoku quickly adjusted to Tsuna's team's pace, impressing Tsuna with their adaptability and determination. But Tsuna paused suddenly, and his form shifted to take a shot. Atsubo widened his eyes, as he tried to block the shot, but Tsuna's release was swift and accurate. The ball sailed through the air, hitting nothing but the net. Grinning at their stunned faces, Tuna spoke, who said I couldn't make a 3. With this newfound understanding, Shizuoka faced a grim reality. As the game rolled on, Shizuoka grappled with the challenge of thwarting Fukuda Sogo's attacks. Whenever their focus centered on Tuna, he effortlessly exploited their attention, finding gaps in their defense. Even when they tried to distribute their attention more evenly, Tuna sliced through their defense or, to make matters worse, deftly delivered 3-pointers or assisted his teammates. The final whistle blew, concluding their friendly match, and the score stood at 97-64, a commanding lead for Fukuda Sogo. They turned to Tuna, who casually commended his teammates. Suddenly, it dawned on them that they had been playing right on the palm of his hands from the beginning of the game. Chapter 75, Chapter 73, title at the end. Midorima remained silent, his eyes fixed on the scoreboard. Then, he shifted his gaze toward Tuna, who appeared to have anticipated this result. I was being arrogant, you said? That might be right. Midorima whispered, not bothering to look back at the court, and walked away to contemplate this unexpected loss. Even though it was a friendly match, Midorima hadn't experienced defeat since his time at Takao. Today marked his first encounter with loss, which was a resounding one, judging by the scoreboard. Shin! Where are you going? Takao called out, watching Midorima stride away from the court. He attempted to follow, but Atsubo restrained him. Atsubo, holding Takao back, shook his head, indicating to leave Midorima alone. Understanding the gesture, Takao abandoned his pursuit. Atsubo approached Tuna, offering his congratulations on the victory. It was an enlightening experience for us. Tuna smiled, appreciating the kind words. Thank you, but you all performed exceptionally well, as expected of one of the 3 kings. Atsubo, though, seemed less convinced, shaking his head. That title seems empty now, considering how you outplayed us. But, Atsubo's expression quickly turned serious as he looked directly at Tuna and declared, we'll return even stronger and make up for today's humiliation. Describing it as a humiliation might have been a bit strong, but that's precisely how they felt. Shizuoka, a veteran team, had suffered a crushing defeat, and it felt like they were merely practice targets. Tuna shook his head with a grin, spreading his arms wide. Well, it's not like we're going anywhere. We'll meet again at the Inter-High, right? Atsubo nodded in agreement. The Inter-High was on the horizon, providing them another opportunity to face each other. But seeing Fukuda Sogo players hastily gathering their things as if they were ready to leave immediately left him bewildered. Takao questioned, aren't you all going to take a little break first? Tuna continued his stride toward the bench and replied, well, we've got more training lined up for the day. So, we're kind of in a hurry. What? Atsubo and a few others who overheard Tuna were equally taken aback. They had just finished a grueling friendly match, and now they were mentioning more training. Their initial astonishment quickly transformed into admiration as they observed Fukuda Sogo saying their goodbyes and boarding their bus. Kimura, watching their departure, remarked, this is what a team that can beat us looks like. They've put in the work. Miyagi agreed, I have to give them credit for that. Atsubo, spurred by their newfound determination, yelled, let's go, team. Back to the gym. We won't let them defeat us again. Extra training starts today. Why? We've been through some grueling training already. Takao voiced his objections. But when he felt Miyagi's hand on his shoulder, he swiftly changed his tune, exclaiming, all right. Let's do this. I'm ready. They trooped back into the gymnasium, engaging in the supplementary practice session. While sweating it out, the door swung open dramatically, revealing Midorima. His eyes glinted with newfound determination, and he wordlessly joined the arduous training. Not a single word was spoken, but there was a shared commitment to avenge today's defeat the next time they crossed paths. Over at Fukuda Sogo, basking in the glory of their victory against the legendary king, spirits were soaring. They even took on an additional set during their training, fueled by the sweet taste of success. They ventured out to explore Tokyo the following day, a rare treat considering their usual tight schedules. After a day of sightseeing, they returned to Shizuoka, returning to the groove of their daily lives, attending school, putting in the hard work during training, and honing their skills. Upon their return from Tokyo, the group playfully teased Haizaki about missing the exhilaration of triumphing against one of the generation of miracles. Haizaki, seething with anger but keeping it in check, could feel Nijimura's meaningful stares whenever he wanted to explode, knowing his tendencies toward violence. Agera's impressive performance had made him the talk of the team, and this constant chatter about him was beginning to get on Haizaki's nerves. He had set his sights on catching up to Tuna, whom he considered the final boss in his journey. Considering Agera as the first step in catching up to Tuna, hearing everyone's praise for Agera only fueled Haizaki's determination to train harder. What really grated on Haizaki's nerves was Agera's belief that they mutually drove each other in their training. Whenever Haizaki pushed himself harder, Agera responded in kind, and they engaged in a silent competition to outtrain each other. Agera, on the other hand, seemed to regard Haizaki as a close friend, almost like a best friend, in addition to Kuroko. He saw Haizaki as the one who consistently motivated him to break through his limits. Nijimura and Tuna could only watch this unfolding dynamic in silence as they were left utterly speechless. As Haizaki and Agera's friendly competition heated up, it seemed to affect the rest of the team, who began to view it as a rivalry, although it was quite different from the truth. As they went about their regular routine of training, they would typically head home after practice. But today was different. Tuna had called them together, and they found themselves lined up on the court, indicating something important was in the offing. Tuna appeared to have an important announcement to share. Inter-High is quickly approaching, and I think it's time for us to step up our training to improve our chances of winning the tournament, Tuna stated, his gaze sweeping over the assembled team. So, to help us do just that, I'd like to introduce you to our new coach. With that, Tuna gestured toward the door, which suddenly swung open. The team was taken aback as they watched a striking foreigner with blonde hair stride onto the court and stand beside Tuna. The blonde foreigner appeared somewhat annoyed as she turned to Tuna. I thought you were sending me on a vacation, but it seems you've found me a job instead, she grumbled. Tuna let out a small chuckle and offered a wry smile. Oh, come on, you can't resist the salary, can you? Alexandra averted her eyes, not willing to admit it. Tuna shook his head and turned back to his team. They watched the exchange between him and Alexandra with puzzled expressions as they conversed in English. So, she's our new coach starting today. And she's no ordinary coach. She used to play in the WNBA in the States, a top-level women's basketball league. So, be sure to follow her training closely, all right? Yes, Captain. The team buzzed with excitement upon learning about their new coach's impressive background. She was not only a skilled coach but also a beautiful foreigner. Tuna nodded and wrapped it up, saying, that's it for today, everyone. Let's head home. Title, A New Coach.
Thanks for listening.